welcome everyone to another episode of Cinematic Realms. I'm your host, Gwen, and with me, as always, is Jared. And today we're talking. Not quite that theme song, but it's the X-Men. How are you doing, Jared?
I'm doing very well. I'm glad to be here and having this discussion. We've mentioned that this is a big anniversary year for us, and this is definitely one of the big ones. So if it's going to be our last discussion before we take a couple weeks off, then I'm glad that we're doing it now.
Yeah, this one is special because this is the one where I was pretty adamant that I wanted to talk about it on the anniversary, or as close as we can get. This is actually funny enough. It's today is the day between the two premieres that the film had. The first one, which was on July 12th, was on Ellis Island, which there's a reason for because of a big climactic set piece of in the actual film. And then the standard regular United States premiere was on July 14th. So we are nestled right in the middle on July 13th, and it seemed absolutely perfect to go ahead and not only discuss the film on its anniversary, but just really do a celebration because it's 25 years, and watching this again today, I was like, it's part of the reason why I've always had a chip on my shoulder with the MCU, uh, is because I'm like, yeah, that's not where it all started. And if Pedar was here, he would say, well, it actually started with Howard the Duck. But I'm going to go ahead and skip over that and say that this is really the start of Marvel in film in the sense of what it has become, and the fact that it's had gained such a foothold on the popular consciousness in a way, and it all started here with the X-Men, and so for me, I'm like, yeah, it didn't really start. Yeah, you all hold your Iron Man close, and I love Robert Downey, and I love Iron Man, but this is where it all began. And so I'm like, watching this, I just had such a huge grin on my face, and being taken back to not only this, like the fun I remember having as a young teenager watching this, but also just it's also a time capsule, not only for when the film was made, but who I was as a 16-year-old, when the film came out, and so I'm really excited to get to talk about it today.
Yeah, I'm share all your excitement. I will make the slight caveat that I personally feel that the Marvel era of film started 2 years earlier in 1998 with Blade, but
You are right. You are right.
I don't want to overlook that, but I will split the difference by saying that Blade, because it is kind of a little bit on the darker side and a little bit, more walled off. Although we are going to get Blade in the MCU eventually, please. Mahershala Ali is still on chat. But with Wesley Snipes, of course, being iconic in that character, but it does feel a little bit more like kind of the aperitif, the kind of the thing that kind of got our appetite stimulated for the X-Men, who are, as I'm sure you would agree, like kind of staples of the Marvel canon, And I know that one of the reasons you've been frustrated with the MCU at times, among many reasons, was the fact that they couldn't include the X-Men in the Marvel films because Fox owned the characters, but now they're coming in house, and we're going to get the X-Men in Doomsday. But now
And
it's
yeah,
yeah.
sorry,
No,
I not. Sorry, go ahead.
No, no, and I was just going to say so, but that makes it all the more resonant with the fact that we were all wondering, like, well, when are we going to get the MCU version of the X-Men? And the answer is eventually, because we kind of have to pay tribute to the iconic legacy that was created with these characters in these films and this interpretation. And we did a little bit of that already with Deadpool and Wolverine last year, but obviously the Doomsday will be like on another level. And it feels very fitting that we now, like, 25 years is definitely a solid enough chunk of time to say that we can look back at a legacy of these films, like the 13 films that were part of the Fox Deadpool, Fox X-Men canon. And so yeah, none of it would have happened if this film hadn't been such a tremendous success against all odds. Because hard as it is to believe, there was a time when a film based on the X-Men was considered to be a massive risk, and they pulled it off with some great casting and a smart approach.
Yeah, I just want to address Blade real quick because I'm sure that there is some big Blade fan, if they're watching, that is like cursing under their breath when I just skipped over them and the legacy. That is absolutely true. I want to pay tribute to Blade because I was there in theaters seeing Blade and being blown away. But here's part of the reason why I do that subconsciously sometimes, where I tend to forget Blade, is because I forget that it's Marvel sometimes. Because here's the thing, like, there's kind of two tracks of comic book films over the past 20 to 25 years, which is we have the very like comic booky, superhero films where they're having a lot of fun and like dealing with serious things, and I think the X-Men in particular, like, while having fun, also did the best job at like tackling issues. Um, and then you have the other track, I think, which is like dark, moody. Uh, let's tell, like, what would this story be like if this was happening for real? Uh, yeah, and not that the X-Men films don't feel real, but it's like, let's really get dark. And for the most part, that's been the province of DC films, like with The Dark Knight and Christopher Nolan stuff. And part of the reason why I get my wires crossed sometimes is because I believe, I'm almost positive, David S. Goyer was involved with Blade.
He was.
Yeah. He was a major part of that, as a matter of fact. He's got his hands in so many pies. I just want to make sure I'm not getting things wrong. And because he was so closely associated with the Christopher Nolan Batman stuff, sometimes it almost, and I know this is sacrilege, but sometimes I tend to subconsciously like move Blade over into that category of the DC stuff with, like, Batman Begins and The Dark Knight and all that stuff. And so it's almost like Blade doesn't feel, which is why it was so, I remember it was so surprising to me when they said they were developing Blade for the MCU. I'm like, really? Which, of course, because it's Marvel. But I have never thought of Blade that way, because even though I was aware of Blade from Spider-Man, the animated series, really the films are what I associate Blade with, and they are so dark and DC-ish, sort of, and so that is the only reason I wanted to state that is probably why I neglected to mention Blade, but Blade is a major part of that. But at the same time, it does feel like X-Men was the major arrival of like Marvel success in film, like on a big, huge, successful level.
Mhm.
Because I feel like Blade was really cool for a lot of us, but it's also, it was kind of like, it's that really dark, weird thing that like only a subsection like is like, we're raving about it, but it's not like, I don't remember how successful it was at the box office, but it's like, you're not going to be necessarily recommending that as like the fun summer movie,
Mhm.
if you know what I mean. Whereas X-Men just felt like it broke through, and all of a sudden Marvel was in at that
Mhm.
point.
Yeah, no, and I kind of think that that's the way to approach. Like we always have to acknowledge Blade is kind of like was the first, at least in
Mm-hmm.
this particular era. But as I mentioned earlier, it kind of feels like it was almost like the appetizer or the film before the film. A lot of times we see this where like, even though these
Yeah.
are obviously made by different filmmakers, but like a filmmaker breaks out with like a really cool like indie drama that gets everyone talking, and then their next film is the one that like catapults them to stardom, or
Or
similarly
when
with
it is different
yeah, yeah,
filmmakers, it's like the people in the know are aware of Dark City, but
yeah,
most people but most people know of the Matrix, and like
exactly.
Dark City is like this cool secret that like
Mhm.
a lot of people know about, and they're like, yeah, it's trading in some of the same stuff as the Matrix, and it was doing the cool new thing first. Uh, but yeah, so anyway, with that out of the way, I just like, I had so much fun turning this on today, and I like to talk about this first, which it's not even strictly about the movie itself, but it's almost about sort of the culture where it was at the time. Um, like, it just feels like it's so like, I feel like younger people today like don't get the concept of what it was like for movies coming out in the year 2000. And like everything felt like new and high tech and like futuristic. And this was on the heels of The Matrix, which was super cool and sleek, and black leather, which we also have in this movie. But like, I've always said, one of my favorite things about this movie is the style of the film, and like the production design. Everything's sleek and like, and it feels just as much like a science fiction film as like a comic book film. Because what was a comic book film back then? There weren't like enough of them to really call it a genre per se. I mean, it was, but it was still in formation. So like, so I've always felt like this movie has a lot of shades of sci-fi, just because it was set in the not too distant future. And like I said, the production design of like when you get down into the bowels of of the mansion, and the stuff with Cerebro and the metal walls and all that stuff. It just like, and again, coming out in the year 2000, when it felt like we were living in the future,
Yeah.
kind of, or at least maybe not in the real way. Everything kind of felt the same in the real world, but at least in pop culture, everything
Mhm.
was futuristic, because, oh my God, we're not in the 1900s anymore. We're in the 2000s. And so this movie really captures that for me. And it's part of the reason, like, I kind of hold it against, like, superhero movies that came afterwards. Again, this is like one of the things that I hold against the MCU, is like that it's kind of, they pride themselves on being set in sort of the quote unquote real world, except they're superheroes and stuff. And I'm always like, yeah, but you're not as cool as the X-Men. And so yeah, it's that's just a huge part of the appeal of this film in particular for me, as well as the second film. Just like, they're about like, they're also like the films, and to be clear, they have their big action set pieces, but I always felt like especially the original X-Men films, and this one in particular, they're not necessarily about big action set pieces. They're about, first of all, they're rooted in character, rooted in ideas, world building. And part of that is driven by what they could do. This was the early 2000s and CGI was breaking out, but you couldn't just use it to level a city and have explosions all over the place. It was, at this point, it was still like an extension of what's your creative plot idea? Okay, CGI can pretty that up a bit and you can do some unique things, but you can't create whole sequences around it. So we're still being creative in that way, and in crafting a story that works and isn't dependent on all that. And so yeah, I just, well, like I said, it's the movie itself. It's sort of what it says about the time in which it was made, and we haven't even talked about the amazing cast of characters yet, and they are so amazing, and we're going to get to them. But yeah, I want to communicate how bubbling over with love I am for this film, especially today on its anniversary.
Yeah, no, and that enthusiasm is just, it's contagious. It's in the air, because this is a movie that absolutely, in my opinion, holds up, even though you can tell it was made at a different time than the movies that we have now. One of the things that struck me watching it, last night, was the fact that even though it's got a rousing action climax, it is ultimately and it doesn't have world stakes because the world leaders are being threatened by Magneto's plans, but ultimately it really is much smaller scale than we have come to expect seeing for this type of comic book movie. And even something 3 years later, what they did with X2, X-Men United, that sequence, with the Alkali Lake and showdown, that feels like the next evolution, an even bigger leveling up. This really is more intimate and character focused, and a lot of it actually comes down, because we get all the many of the iconic X-Men, Charles Xavier, Cyclops, Jean Grey, Storm, but at its heart, a lot of this movie really is about the connection between Logan and Rogue, and I just think that is something that has really held up brilliantly well. And I found myself actually getting very moved, on this scene on the train, where we're seeing Hugh Jackman, who has gone on to become such an iconic, star, who is synonymous with the character of Logan Wolverine. But I was just reminding myself, the fact of how good I think Anna Paquin is in this movie as well. I think she kind of gets a little bit of a bad rap at times, because one, her version of Rogue is a little bit, shall we say, depowered from compared to the animated series, but also because she's not always the most action for basic, but emotionally, I think she's the linchpin of this movie.
Well, people always say Rogue is depowered, and I don't want to dispute that, especially because that's something that Ari likes to to go on about. But also I'm yeah, but the reason why she's so overpowered in certain other versions of the story is because she took the powers of Miss Marvel,
Exactly.
and so it's not necessarily precise to say that she's depowered, more that in other versions she's overpowered, almost. And I love that version of Rogue. My favorite version of Rogue absolutely is the animated series version. And I loved seeing how powerful she was when we got X-Men 97. That was great. But I think it's a little bit unfair, because this is sort of, first generation Rogue.
Yeah.
And so I don't necessarily know if it's fair to like, because maybe at this point they didn't, in effect end up doing this, but maybe they had ambitions to lead us there at some point. And, then there's the whole thing about, where these films sort of went from here, the disaster that was X3, and, beyond that, we'll see. I do hope that we get something closer to the animated series Rogue in the MCU when they do their next versions of the characters. But I don't hold it against this version of Rogue. I'm quite fond of her, and I think Anna Paquin does a fantastic job.
Yeah, no, I mean, I clearly, I love her too. I was just bringing that up exactly so that you could kind of make that case that, like, yes, like Rogue is an iconic member of the X-Men in her own right, and this is kind of, in many respects, her origin story. Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is, a lot of these characters we, are already established as, mutants, like, in their powers, in this movie, and then of course we have Logan, who doesn't remember what most of his life. But what is really essential about the character of Rogue in this movie, I found, is like the approach that this movie takes of kind of delving into what it would be like for these characters to discover their powers for the first time. And the thing about Rogue is that, unfortunately, her power is a complicated one. It is a power that, her gift, as Xavier would call it, unfortunately involves, in many respects, her ability to hurt other people if she's not careful. And the idea that this beautiful young woman, like, isn't able to have physical contact with anyone that she might want to, anyone that she loves, because she could hurt or kill them. Like, that's a heartbreaking and horrifying thing for her to reckon with. And like this opening scene that you have up on the screen here, where she's like any other, 16, 17-year-old girl who is talking about her dreams of the future. She wants to take this big adventure up to Alaska before she goes to college. And she, clearly likes this boy, and she's like, we've seen this 100 times, where they move in for the kiss, and it's very sweet, and then it becomes terrifying. And when Rogue is kind of like, backed into the corner, like screaming and crying because, her boyfriend is like seizing there on the bed, it's like, this does not feel like a hell yes, I discovered I'm a mutant, as we oftentimes feel. Like, it's scary. And that is one of the things that I think this movie does so well, is it plays up the idea of how, like, these gifts, because they are gifts and they are special abilities for these special people, but much of the world doesn't see it that way, at least at this time. And in fact, even some of the characters who have that ability don't see it at this time. There was Rogue comes to embrace her power eventually, but in this movie, I'm sure she would give absolutely anything to be normal, as they would call it. And as you said, they kind of go some interesting directions with that later in X3 that I'm not the biggest fan of.
We're not going to talk about that.
But then they kind of walk it back, because this series is of course, absolutely, like, religiously devoted to its continuity. So.
Well, yeah. I'm going to say again that this is like my favorite. It's sort of my favorite thing that came about as a result of Deadpool and Wolverine. It's that they didn't even take the, like, and maybe if they had addressed it in a movie different from Deadpool, they would have done it different. But I always thought they would have taken the multiverse concept of the MCU and used that to, like, address and fix, the continuity issues of the X-Men franchise by saying, like, well, actually this movie happened in an alternate timeline or whatnot. Instead, they just made it all one messy universe. It's the Fox cinematic universe, and it's all the same place, and the continuity is just canon, but it's all messed up. I just think that's so funny. But who knows what they'll do with that in the future. But as for right now, it's like, yep, no, we're standing by it.
Which,
Which
which
is
which
great.
which I respect, because
Yeah,
obviously this movie also came out in an era before the YouTube era and the CinemaSins nonsense of people who
yeah,
would go back and be like, this doesn't track, this character motivation doesn't line up. Like, I mean, obviously, like, it's fun to debate that kind of stuff, but I do kind of respect that eventually they were just kind of like, you know what, you know how we're gonna handle this, time travel. And time travel is always works out so smoothly for everyone involved. um but yeah.
as I don't remember what this quote is from, but it's I'm sure it'll come to me in a second. Oh, I remember what. It's not a movie, but it's like because as we know, time travel always makes things make more sense, uh, which is actually from a little like fun, goofy video they did at one of the Comic Cons for Lost, which
Yeah.
was like a scene between Jacob and the Man in Black that was like totally tongue in cheek. Uh, and that's the Man in Black saying that to Jacob, and it's like, yeah, yeah. But no, it's in any case, it's not really an issue for this film as it stands because
Mhm.
this was the first one, and it the continuity is what's in the movie. That was for later on.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, where were we going with that? I don't
Well, no,
even.
I was talking about the character of Rogue and how, like,
Yeah,
her origin is kind of, like, not what we would typically see for like a superhero origin story,
yeah,
and like in many respects it's upsetting and frightening, and it's like that's kind of her journey throughout this movie, where, and I would more say, even like, she gets more secure in her powers by the end, and certainly by X2 she is, embraced it and found a way to, live with it. But in this movie, like, it's telling that, like, some of the first scenes we see of characters, grappling with your mutations, are scenes of horror and trauma, because the scene that opens the movie is the iconic scene of young Eric Lenscher, young Magneto, like trying to reach his mother in Auschwitz, the concentration camp, and during World War II, and just holding out his hand and on pure instinct tearing the metal of the gates apart, trying to get to her before he's knocked unconscious by the Nazi soldiers. And
yeah.
like that, it's an incredibly bold opening for this movie. And same with.
I Yeah, it's this was one of the things that really immediately set this film apart. Which is a funny thing to say in retrospect, because we hadn't exactly like, Blade had just come out, as we were just talking about, like a year or two before, and that was pretty dark. But the thing about this movie, but like other comic book films have been like Superman and and the Tim Burton Batman films that could trade in serious stuff, and the Tim Burton Batman movies were certainly dark, but there was a seriousness about opening this film in Auschwitz, and it was like, even with the film opening with you know a big splashy X-Men opening credit sequence, uh, this scene came on, and you were still like tempted to be like, "Am I in the wrong movie?"
Mhm.
Uh, and if you walked in late and missed the credits, you most certainly probably would have thought you were in the wrong movie, until young Eric, unleashes his powers for the first time. But it's just one of the things that immediately made such an impression, where I was like, "Oh, holy shit!" Um, because it felt like you could have been watching a scene out of like, if not for the color, Schindler's List,
Yeah.
honestly. And so that's just one of the things that immediately set the tone for this film. That yes, it's a comic book film, but but it's treating its characters seriously, and it's treating what they're going through seriously. And yeah, and as a matter of fact, and I don't want to spend too much of the stream necessarily going off and talking about what other movies did right or did wrong, but it's actually one of my least favorite things about X-Men First Class, which is a movie that I mostly really enjoy, is I don't like the fact that they went back to this and had a mutant villain be like the cause of Magneto's suffering here. And I just tend to ignore it when I'm watching this one, because I like the fact that what young Eric is facing here is the horror of the Nazis, and that's horrific enough. That's even more horrific than if there's a quote unquote movie villain, behind his pain and suffering. And so, yeah, it's just one of the things that immediately like pulled me into the film, was that we were dealing with, in a comic book film, what's at stake is real trauma and real issues, real societal problems, and real pain and suffering. And the movie is still going to have fun, but it's letting you know you can take this seriously. It's okay.
Yeah, and that I think was incredibly important. And obviously now that we've had so many quote unquote dark and gritty, superhero movies, some people are like craving a little bit more of a return to like the kind of the optimism that I think the new Superman movie, for instance, seems to be capturing. But I think one of the reason that this movie is so effective is it doesn't show us these scenes of trauma for characters like Eric and Marie, to show us that they are, to wallow in that trauma. It's to kind of set the stakes of what their powers can do and how the world will react to them. And that, gives us the opportunity to contrast, that the possible bleakness of that with the hope provided by Charles Xavier and and his X-Men, who are characters who are trying their best to, be better than the world would theoretically allow them to be, and that's, the scene you have up on the screen now, this opening, scene between Xavier and Eric after the Senate hearing, where they're talking about hope, and, and Xavier acknowledges that he's still looking for hope, and Magneto's like, well, I have a different approach. I will bring you hope, old friend, and all you have to do is not get in my way. And of course, what Magneto is actually bringing is, unfortunately, violence and death in many respects, which is one of the reasons that Magneto is considered one of the most iconic characters, in terms of his motivation, is the idea that this young Jewish boy from 1944 who watched his parents be taken from him and killed, and was separated from them, that he would be, seeing this happen to his new community of people, the mutants, and his response in turn is to, embrace some of the same ideas of, well, then it is truly us against them, and we are the superior race, and we should, set the course of the future, And obviously he's incredibly a complex character, but like that kind of inherent contradiction is what makes him like one of the more memorable villains.
Yeah, and also I want to note that like I did not come to X-Men through the comics, but through the animated series. And one of the things about adapting X-Men for the Saturday morning cartoon is that maybe they weren't going to delve into all the like Nazi stuff for a young like audience that might be a little too much, and so they made it like they alluded to it, but like the major thing that turned Magneto was then he was trying to like help people in a small country, and then the people he was trying to protect were like brutally murdered, and like that was, and so that's the way the show chose to try and kind of portray that, and then also, like I said, allude to the stuff when he was a child, but not make it like explicitly real world. And so really for me, this was the first time seeing, that this, like, what, he actually faced as a child, and which just enhanced the reality of it, because I was coming from a more like kid friendly version of Magneto's story, and then seeing exactly what was originally written for the comics, and then told very honestly in the film. And yeah, Magneto has always been one of my favorite characters, which does not mean that I always agree with him. He's very sympathetic in the sense of like the trauma that he's endured and what he's seen, and you can understand why he wants to do things that he does. But I it's one of those things where it's like a lot of the things that we kind of, the trials that we go through over in our Star Wars fandom too, which is like loving the story, but sometimes having major issues with the fans. Mm-hmm. And so like I have a lot of issues with other people who love Magneto, who might love him for different reasons. And like I hate the, just like I hate the, people who love the last. I mean, I'm a big fan of The Last Jedi, but I hate people who are big fans of the movie and use the kill the past as like the mantra of the movie, which is like, you don't understand that movie at all, actually. And similar thing here, I can't stand the people who will go, Magneto is right. Or Magneto was right. And it's like, yeah, actually, that's a very complicated thing. You can say that he's right about humanity and sort of what drives them, but he's not right in his tactics. He's not right in what he chooses to do. And I think that this movie does a really great job of like, of pointing out his flaws, and like we can understand where he's coming from, but he's still going to do terrible things to terrible people, and he's actually going to use somebody else, someone innocent, so that he can personally oversee his new world order. That is not someone who is right.
Yeah.
So yes, like, great character, sympathetic character. That doesn't have to translate to hero / he's right, and that's a big sort of issue that I tend to have with people who don't understand the difference between a sympathetic villain and a hero, or even an anti-hero. It's like, just because you people think that like, you understand the villain, then he's a good guy. If you can't, but if you're gonna call him a villain at all, then he has to be like reprehensible and like, you can't understand him at all. It's like, the people today are not comfortable in the gray area of characters, and Magneto is a character who exists in that gray area. And again, going back to the animated series, it was like, how are you going to do that for a kids show? Because you can't get too dark, which is why like they actually like I always say they flirted with Magneto as a villain in the series, but most of the time he was just Xavier's bestie. And like, he was actually helping the X-Men. And that's because Magneto's a hard character to pull off if you can't get into those more sort of complex areas for an adult audience. That said, I loved him in the animated series. Like, he was probably one of my favorite parts of that, and mostly because I think they did about as great a job as you can manage to paint a character as villainous with villainous intentions, but then show that he can see the error of his ways too, and maybe pull back from that. And I think he's one of the most complex characters in animation as a result of that. But for a movie, they can really get into more of the complicated nature of that, and that you can sympathize with this guy, but he can still make have serious errors in judgment, and be prideful, and just come to the wrong conclusions. And yet at the end of the day, him and Charles can still be insanely close and care for each other. And it's just, I think, I venture to say, like, the two most important things about this movie are, first of all, establishing Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, which was just like a masterstroke, and has, like, I don't say this as an insult, it's carried the franchise for the past 25 years. And also establishing this relationship between Charles Xavier and Magneto, courtesy of the brilliant Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen.
Yeah, no, and like those two actors are the chemistry and the weight that they give all of their scenes together is, as you said, one of the reasons why this movie had such an incredible electricity when it first came out, and why it has endured, and why they're still playing the characters 25 years later. And yeah, the thing about the Magneto and Xavier dynamic that I think some people kind of fall prey to is that Magneto is incredibly sympathetic in his motivations and in his history. But ultimately, to quote, to cross the streams and quote a DC film that we recently discussed, Batman Begins, it's not who you are underneath, it's what you do that defines you. And it's Magneto's actions that make him a villain, not his intentions. And in many respects, I think the reason that we get a lot of Magneto as right people is because, one, when people see injustice happening, they have a bias and a tendency towards active characters who are going to do something about it. And in many respects, that tends to be the heroes. In this case, it's the villain who is basically saying, no, I will not stand for this. And if you are going to hurt me and my people, well, then I will hurt you back. And that, I think a lot of audience members are kind of like, yes, that's the way to respond to being pressed. And Xavier's method is the method that is harder to understand on the surface, because in many respects, he's advocating for tolerance and understanding, which people have a tendency to think of as more passive concepts, even though they're incredibly hard to put into practice. And it's hard. And also, he is essentially sticking up for people who, in many respects, hate and fear him. And I think a lot of people have trouble wrapping their heads around that idea. But it's one of the reasons why Xavier is such an important hero, because he is walking the harder path, and he is leading others down it in like his X-Men, in a way that they're trying to fight by in many, not to protect mutants, yes, but in a broader sense, to protect everyone. And I think that is why, when we see certain characters express frustration or seem more sympathetic to Magneto's point of views, it's telling that Xavier never shouts or gets really makes his point more forcefully. He's very calm. He's very steady, and it's because that, in a kind of an almost Jedi-like way, he knows that's what he has to be in order to not go down the path that his old friend Eric did. And I think that is, again, a testament to casting an actor like Patrick Stewart, who can play that calmness and that stillness, and a character who is famously in a wheelchair and therefore not as active as some of the other, Caros who are jumping and punching and kicking, but make him feel like a monumental figure that, of course, all these other incredibly powerful characters like Scott and Jean and Storm just respect and revere. And Logan comes to as well. Obviously Logan, being the outsider, is a little bit more skeptical of all this at the jump, but it's telling that, in that scene we mentioned with Rogue, when he finds her on the train, and he basically is like, yeah, I know this all seems kind of strange and frightening and weird, but I think this guy Xavier truly wants to help you, and that is a rare thing in this world.
For people like us.
People like us, yeah. So what do you say? You want to give these geeks one more shot? So of course he has to undercut it with humor, but like the emotion there is incredibly sincere. It's why it's one of my favorite scenes in the movie.
Yeah. Which also I want to point out, like, going back again to like the whole style of this film, like I haven't like explicitly mentioned the costume design yet. I know a lot of people get on the black leather outfits, but if you can look beyond that, I think like the costume design in this film, and including that, I like the black leather, but just the costume design, like across the board, is so phenomenal. Like I love Rogue's outfit here, the green with the hood, and like it just, I've always thought it's like that it makes her appear as like, that's her clothing, but it almost gives like an appearance of like she's different from others. It's kind of a she's trying to hide herself, almost. And I just, that the aforementioned like leather outfits which were very Matrixy, like Magneto's like just sort of relaxed outfit, like in the beginning it's like this sort of maroon, like very comfy looking shirt and stuff. Like a lot of the stuff is like understated, but I think it's just, they did an absolutely beautiful job, especially like really trying to thread the needle for this film of like letting characters look like they're like comic book counterparts, but also needing to keep it anchored in reality, because like this film, like as much as I just said, I think the costume design is absolutely brilliant. It was walking so that the MCU films could run, later on down the line, where, once people were ready for like actual comic book accurate costumes, like, people are like, oh yeah, like Deadpool says, that only took 20 fucking years, but it's like we had to work up to the yellow.
Exactly.
It's like you couldn't go there right off the bat. I know a lot of people think they could have, but they couldn't.
No, they absolutely not. Like that is that's one of the things where, like, you had to have been there in the early 2000s to get just what a risk this movie was in the first place, to understand why they didn't go right to the yellow spandex, which they make a joke about in the movie, which I think is very funny. Where Logan's like, black leather, really? And Scott's like, well, what did you expect? Yellow spandex. And I get the comic nerds were like, we expected that. But it's like in this time, like, one of in order for this movie to get made at all, there had to be, unfortunately, or not unfortunately, but in reality, some concessions to the wider audience who is not religiously devoted to the comic books. It had to have a broader sense of appeal. And one of the things that, just an unfortunate reality, is that at that time, the general audience was not prepared for all the characters in yellow spandex. So one of the ways you can draw them in is have them clad in kick-ass black leather, especially
Yeah.
coming off The Matrix. And I love the costumes in this movie. I mean, I didn't have the same devotion to the yellow spandex from the comics anyway, so like this was really kind of the character look I was most familiar with. But then, Deadpool making his snarky joke as Deadpool does, like, again, as you said, it gave us that moment where you can earn, now that these characters are more established, you can earn that moment in Deadpool and Wolverine where Hugh Jackman wears the yellow suit and then he rips off his sleeves and then he dons the mask and everyone gets to cheer.
But now 25 years after the fact, this is so established that I look at this, I'm like, yeah, that's fucking Wolverine.
Exactly.
I love this look.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I've always been like supportive of the costumes from this film series before they got braver by going all out. And I was one of the loudest people in the theater cheering when when Wolverine dons the mask in Deadpool and Wolverine. It's like, how could you not? But yeah, but I like it all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. God, just so much fun. Okay. I'm trying to think where to jump to next. Okay, I know what I wanted to talk about because we are just going to jump around. Like,
yeah.
This is just like we said, we're celebrating the movie. I want to like talk about the first time the claws came out.
Yeah.
Because again, like watching this, and I had my headphones on, so I was like jamming the sound, and man, just like that moment of when the guy pulls the knife out and Rogue goes, "Look out!" and Wolverine gets up, turns around, and the sound as those claws come out, and Michael Kamen's music, driving up the tension. And there is no way to describe to people who like weren't there at the time what this felt like, to see the claws coming out of Logan's hands for the first time, and just the way that Hugh Jackman like carried himself with the growling and the and I even my mom who went to go see this movie with me, she was like, "Oh my God, he's perfect." Maybe she meant something slightly different. I don't know. But yeah, it's just one of those moments in cinema that you will never ever forget. And like I said, it's now people probably just take it for granted, but there was just no way to describe the thrill of this moment of seeing Wolverine on screen, live action with those claws. Just absolutely amazing.
Yeah. No, I mean it's an awesome moment because it is the reveal. We've seen obviously before this that Logan can take a beating, but we hadn't seen the true extent of his powers and his claws that are obviously an iconic staple of the character. And this is one of the cases where we get to see the movie kind of again having to ground its story a little bit more in the real world. Like it gets to have that effective reveal of showing actually like the skin on his knuckles splitting as the claws come out, which I think we all understand had to happen, but you don't really think about it in the comics when he's getting ready to kick ass. And in this scene, he's going up against a couple characters who are kind of bigoted, and so like it's very satisfying to see him hold his claws to this guy's throat and then cut the dude's musket in half in a great moment. But what I remember most about the claws scene is what happens after, which is in the truck when Rogue asks him about it, and she asks him the question, "When they come out, does it hurt?" And you just see Logan kind of say quietly, "Every time." because that again is building up the cost of this gift that he has, and it's one of the things that makes the character of Logan and Hugh Jackman's portrayal of him so beloved, is because he plays that kind of rougher edge of a character with his skill set of somebody who can heal from almost any wound and has these claws that he can use to stab and slice and maim people if necessary. Like, obviously a character like that has the potential to be very dangerous and very violent, and Logan's past makes him even more so because he has also gone through incredible trauma in his life, even if he doesn't remember some of it. But it makes it all the more special that even though he's become kind of a cynical character when we first meet him, that he still retains that spark of hope that makes him, this is the reason why he ultimately goes with Xavier when, by his outlook on life, you might think he might be better suited for a character like Magneto, but no, this is what makes him ultimately the hero that we love.
And you see what he's like when he's devoid of hope later on down the line in Logan.
Yeah.
And that's when we really see his violence unleashed in that movie. And yeah, so it's, oh god. And speaking of this whole opening section with Logan, I just also want to just talk about, I love the whole thing with him in the ring, and 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 the manager going, whatever you don't hit him in the balls. You said anything goes, but he'll take it personal.
And he does.
And that's the thing, like we said, this movie does have humor, it has fun, even as it's also taking things seriously. But yeah, and that whole opening, before we even see the claws, just seeing the way he carries himself in that fight, and the way he uses his hands, fans know the claws are in there. But he's not using those yet, but he is those hands still pack a punch, and his head packs a punch, and yeah, just the whole way he holds himself. It's I know a lot of more comic book fans were oh, Hugh Jackman is way too tall to be Wolverine. But when I saw him for the first time, I was this guy is perfect.
Yeah.
And of course, we did talk in our Deadpool Wolverine discussion about the joke with they showed us the really short Wolverine, and Deadpool going, "Oh, look at you little comic book actor." That was great.
Yeah, sometimes you have to show audiences on screen that thing you think you want, you actually don't.
But yeah, no, oh my god, it's so great. And which I'm gonna actually take a moment now. I'm thinking about it. I was talking about sort of the nostalgia of the time, and with that came the we're in the year 2000, and and by the end of that year, the movie had come out and on DVD, and this was when DVDs were really starting to flourish. And I still have my original DVD copy with the shiny metallic cover and the digipack on the inside. And yeah, it's and again, what I was talking about, they were even really going for a sci-fi aesthetic with the art design for the promotion of the film too. So yeah, I'm never getting rid of this thing. I'm gonna that. This gets held on to along with my Lord of the Rings DVDs. They're never going anywhere.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know you did a little bit of a necessary downsizing of your physical media collection recently, but I'm like, I have a feeling that none of the X-Men stuff is going there.
Yeah. Yeah, there are certain ones that I'm never getting rid of. It's just like I'm I'm never ever getting rid of those. I showed them off over the past couple weeks. The Star Wars
Yeah.
trilogy videotapes, both the original and the special edition, like full screen and widescreen. They're not going anywhere. So yeah, but yeah. So we talked about the relationship between Xavier and Magneto. I want to take a minute because I have heard from other people in the past that you know that Patrick Stewart doesn't have quite as much to like to do in this movie from a performance standpoint, that he's serving to do more exposition in this movie, which is certainly true, but I think it's that underestimates what Patrick Stewart really has to do in terms of creating a presence of like this warm presence of someone who is there to support everybody and to try and shepherd humanity and to a better place, and also just the fact that honestly all he would have had to do is show up as Patrick Stewart playing Charles Xavier, because this is something that people wanted for years and years and years. Anytime people were fan casting Professor X, it was oh, it's got to be Picard. And so he would have only had to do that, but I think in a way it's almost subversive that he doesn't show up and he's not barking orders like a Picard type. He has a very relaxed demeanor, and like you said, he's not for shouting things, or he's very much trying to bring people along and push them in the right direction. And I actually think it's an incredibly beautiful performance from him. Certainly he gets more emotional stuff to do in X2, and then and then later on down the line, particularly in something like Logan. But I think he does a great job here. Not even speaking of his scenes with Ian McKellen, in which the two of them just absolutely shine. And we're going to talk about Ian McKellen in a second. But I just remember seeing this movie and they could not have nailed Professor X anymore. And I don't have the the issues with Professor X that a lot of comic book fans do. I know Professor X from the animated series. So from my perspective, Professor X has always been a paragon of goodness. People who know him in the comics from way back when have a lot of issues with him, shall we say. But for me, I think anybody who was raised on the animated series and then these films just looks at Professor X as someone who always has the best of intentions, and is someone to look up to, a father figure. And I just think that Patrick Stewart just nailed his calm demeanor and his inherent goodness, and his wanting to take care of people. And yeah, I don't think we could have ever asked for a better Professor X, and I think he does a great job in this film.
Yeah, no, I mean, I respectfully to those who think that he doesn't have much to do in this movie. I disagree. I think that again, this is a case where character audience members having kind of more of a bias towards active characters can sometimes underrate, what it is, just how hard it is and how important it is to portray a fundamentally, in this telling, comics aside, good character who with good intentions, who is very, calm and reasoned, and is ultimately, trying to move forward in the right way, even if that means moving a little bit slower than some of the other characters would theoretically like. And this is where, you mentioned that he has to do a lot of exposition in this movie. This is where like an actor like Patrick Stewart can do one of the hardest things possible for an actor to do, which is make exposition interesting. And like, I actually think back to the fact, like, there's the joke about like I would watch that actor like read the phone book or whatever. In the case of Patrick Stewart, I actually might, because I remember one of my favorite things, or one of many people's favorite things in the early days of the pandemic that was actually giving people hope and joy, was Patrick Stewart decided to read one of Shakespeare's 116 sonnets a day, and videotape it and put it out in the world. And people were like, this is giving me life and hope because this man's voice is just like so good.
Well, and we're about to talk about him in a second, but like it's the same thing like with Ian McKellen. One of my favorite additions to the extended cut of Return of the King is just like, it's like a 5-minute scene of Gandalf just telling Pippin about the history of Gondor. Yeah. And like it's full exposition. And it's one of my favorite things in the entire movie. It's just sometimes you're like, just let these great actors who have such amazing delivery, let them exposition on.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that Patrick Stewart's performance in this movie is wonderful. And yeah, I mean, like, it is telling that like perhaps we don't see the full extent of his powers unleashed, for one of the world's most powerful mutants. I mean, obviously we get the Cerebro sequence and the showdown at the train station. But then he is taken out before the big climax of the movie. So, you might be forgiven for focusing more on like some of the other heroes who go out to save Rogue and save the world from Magneto's plot. But ultimately, as Scott like says, when Xavier is, out of commission for a while, like, we're all here because of you. And that is what, Patrick Stewart has, that gravity, that charisma that, was so important to set up the fact that this man has not only, been a mentor for, for Scott and Jean and Aurora, but that he has saved basically all of these kids, who many of whom would be lost in the world without a place to go, his school. And one of his greatest acts of heroism, frankly, in the movie is the fact that he just is giving these kids who would have been, rejected by their parents or ran away or, treated terribly by the world, giving them a place to grow up and be normal. Like, that is the everyday heroism that people tend to overlook.
Right before you said that, I was going to talk about the line when let me see if I can remember the exact line. Talking about Road, and here she is, with others her own age, interacting, not feared, something to that effect. And it's funny, like, let's just say, like, the world has revealed itself to be a lot shittier in the years since this movie came out. A lot of the stuff, and maybe it is just me having my eyes open, but like, and also I think the world has gotten worse, honestly, or at least like it's become more visible.
Yeah.
And so when I was growing up, like, the persecution that mutants face in X-Men felt something that was like, it was alluding to a bygone era where, yes, you still had some of that, but the really bad stuff, from my point of view, was in the past, and this was more of like the science fiction things that if there were mutants, this kind of thing would rear its head. Again, now having grown up, I can see how prevalent this type of thing is in the real world. And even with my own, journey of discovery that I've been on, and getting to actually experience what it's like to go like interact with like, I have a group that I meet up with where it's fun to just sit there and be with other people who are going through the things that you're going through, and to just be able to interact without any fear of anybody judging you. And that is what he's talking about here, is that this is a world in which they have to be afraid of revealing themselves, which a lot of people, feel in the real world. And to just, if nothing else, to just be able to do something as simple as go to school and interact with friends without being scared. That is, you're absolutely right. That is so heroic and so absolutely amazing and so valuable. And so it's just amazing the way that this story, and it's the reason why like the X-Men films and the X-Men stories continue to get even richer and reveal more about themselves as time goes on, because I think as I grow older, I understand more about the world, and because X-Men has always so been about the struggles that that people on the outside have to face in the real world, that like there are layers of these stories that never stop revealing themselves. And it's what's so great about these stories, and unfortunately what's so awful about the real world. And so that line in particular really struck a chord with me when I was watching today.
Yeah. No, and this is one of the cases where like the movie was obviously made at the time that it was made in the year 2000, but why it is still relevant today is because these themes, these ideas are, universal human, part of the universal human condition, both for good and for ill. And they're like the X-Men in general have always been, a story about characters who have in many respects been othered by the rest of the world. And then the fact that they're finding community with each other is, hopeful and inspiring. People have obviously read different allegories and analogs onto, the X-Men over the years, whether it's, ideas about like queer identity or, racism, or just in general, like, different belief systems. And sometimes those themes are right on the surface, and sometimes you have to dig a little bit harder for them. And when the characters have, superpowers, it's very easy to just look at it from a purely fantastical context. And that is where I think a number of fans may have missed the point, for instance, that like, guys, the X-Men were always woke. They didn't.
It always kills me because, like, for me, I was a kid watching the animated series, and like it's all there in that scene between Storm and Jubilee, where why do people hate us? People fear what they do not understand. Like, for me, there was no other way to take that. It's like I was raised on that story. Like the X-Men was so important to me. Like I didn't miss what that was about. I maybe thought that it wasn't as prevalent. Like I understood that racism was still a thing. Maybe not to the degree that it was. Maybe I had, because I was a little kid, maybe I thought things were better than they were, but I understood that as a concept it still very much like existed, and that's what was being talked about there, persecution, and that people are afraid of things that are different, and that this is what this story was talking about. And then when these movies came out, I understood that in addition to racism, it was also, you know, it was also tackling the idea of a queer identity, and you know, that wasn't very veiled to me, and that made sense to me, and so like I get raised on this story like about how, you know, people, you know, that humanity and society, you know, fears people who are different, and then in turn like decides to persecute them and hate them, and that that's not a good thing. And like this is thanks to X-Men and probably other stories as well, like this is a concept that became instrumental to who I was growing up. And so it's always so weird to me when I hear people who like apparently completely missed that. It's like, how could you not understand that this is what the story is?
Yeah.
Are you that thick? Apparently.
Yeah, I mean, so some of them are like, I mean, like just like the recent Superman is an immigrant, you know, thing. Like, I'm like,
I just,
not
which by the way, I've been avoiding like all like headlines. I didn't even know what the reviews were. I just went to go see the movie yesterday, and I got to have the most like just honest, pure experience with it, and which I was so happy about. And then like yesterday, I just like clicked on to a page, and I didn't see anything concerning the reviews of the movie or anything like that. But I saw something about that about the idea that James Gunn politicized, you know, Superman and turning it into an like making it about immigrants. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about?
yeah,
But yeah,
we don't need to go down the full rabbit hole because it is incredibly dumb. But I would like just on the pure surface level of like, guess what? Where was Superman born? Krypton. Where does he live now? Kansas. What does that make him? An immigrant. The fact that that's political now is more of a statement on where certain people who want to, you know, behave and treat others in a certain way don't like being confronted with that kind of stuff, so they push back against art for essentially being what it has always been. And in this case, like, I think that yes, like, you know, in the case of the X-Men, like, obviously one of the reasons that a lot of people who have different backgrounds have gravitated to the X-Men over the years is because they have felt ostracized and othered, and like the idea of having these heroes who are, you know, a community that are able to overcome that and become, you know, legends in their own right. That is an incredibly powerful idea. But even for somebody like, for instance, me, who is not a member of one of those marginalized groups, as a, you know, cisgender heterosexual like white guy, like, these stories still have value in that context, because if you get the messaging, then what does it do? It helps you understand. It helps you, you know, put yourself in somebody else's shoes. It helps encourage tolerance. And so that is what, and again, if you are looking at these movies and these stories purely on just it's cool, like whiz bang, you know, characters with superpowers fighting, then it's perfectly acceptable to enjoy the movies on that front. But then you are kind of setting yourself up to be blindsided when it's revealed there's actually more going on there. And that is why I really don't have much sympathy or patience for the people who are like, why can't you get the politics out of this superhero story? And it's like, well, because it is inherently political. And again, one of the movie's testaments is that it manages to still be entertaining, and it's not, you know, and you have to like disguise, you know, that a little bit, because frankly, you know, if the movie just came out and said those statements like boldly and made it a direct allegory, then it wouldn't be as effective as a piece of storytelling. But the message is there, and that's a testament to the writing and the script, you know. And yeah, this is a very great quote from Danny. Why do we fear so much? And this other, in the other, this thing we so little understand in ourselves. Yeah, that it is like the best art can not only like, you know, engender empathy for somebody else's experience, it can be a mirror to, you know, your own experience. And that can be either for good or for ill if you're willing to take that message and potentially learn to change and grow if so inspired.
Yeah, I think it's the reason why I've always loved the X-Men films so much, and why I kind of stuck by them even as, you know, people were getting distracted by other newfangled comic properties. It's because for me it was always because the material was always so rich, because it was talking about societal issues, and that it wasn't just a like fun, entertaining, like comic book spectacle. There were a lot of things that it was saying about our culture and our world. Um, and so the idea that that would pass other people by is just mystifying to me. Or maybe it used to be. Now nothing surprises me. But yeah. So anyway, we talked about Patrick Stewart. Let's like move over to Ian McKellen, because like, and I just talked about how I think Patrick Stewart is amazing. I love him, and when the two of these guys get together, you know, in this movie and beyond, it's just magic. But like what Ian McKellen pulls off in this is absolutely astounding. This was not the very first thing that I saw Ian McKellen in. I had actually gotten to see a movie, another film by Bryan Singer called Apt Pupil, just about, I think in the year before this movie came out. And it was close enough to where I was aware of the fact that, you know, which was kind of morbidly funny because he was playing a Nazi in that film. And then here he is playing Magneto in this one. But I just remember being like so terrified of him in that film, and he was absolutely brilliant. And then I saw him here, and then God, a year after this, he was going to be Gandalf. And you know, and the idea that I would have ever not known who Ian McKellen was is mind-boggling. But yeah, just like, and I like, you know, my standards were high for the character of Magneto. It's like I talked about how much I loved him from the animated series, and so just those some of those first lines, you know, they've already been stated a couple times now, but I will bring you hope, old friend, and I ask only one thing in return: don't get in my way. You know, I mean, it's just so amazing. And then just little things like when Sabretooth comes in and says, you know, he's like, what happened? They knew. The way he just sits down, he goes, Charles. You know, it's just everything. But yeah, Danny, absolutely perfect casting. And this is like, it's the reason why these actors keep coming back to these roles. It's been 25 years, and they're coming back again to play these characters in Avengers Doomsday. And it's like, because, you know, and all due respect to James McAvoy and Michael Fassbender, who were both brilliant playing the younger counterparts, but you can't beat this perfect casting. I mean, like Ian McKellen just, he dominates the screen every moment he's on as Magneto. And I don't know, I almost don't even know what else to say, because like he's on screen and he's just, I can't believe I'm going to say this. seriously, no pun intended, but he has such a magnetic presence. Yes, I know. I'm sorry. Uh, and yeah, and then I was thinking about another line he says. It's not from this film; it's from the next one. But I love it when Pyro says to him, kind of a dorky looking helmet, and he's like, "This dorky looking helmet is the only thing that's going to protect us from the real bad guys." And yeah, it's just, oh god, he's so great. I don't know. You say something because I can't come up with anything to say other than he's great. He's great.
Well, he is. That is
Yeah.
an accurate description of Ian McKellen's performances as Magneto. But what has always struck me about his performance in this role is just how he can be charismatic and malevolent, but also charming when he wants to be. And that's what makes him, an incredibly dangerous and compelling, antagonist, because he is, Xavier's counterpart, in addition to being his, former, and I think it's sometimes still current best friend. But it's because, he has managed to, through his force of personality and the strength of his will, inspire a different sect of mutants to follow him down this path. And yeah, and just the way he's shot in this movie, like that shot you have up on the screen is, so good. But in particular, I think what about the Ian McKellen's performance is, he like, I mean, I even though I saw this movie before Lord of the Rings, like the character of Gandalf was so, instantly iconic to me that I almost like retroactively hadn't even realized that it was Ian McKellen in this role until I went back and watched it again. I'm like, oh shit, it is the same guy. And that's just a testament to the range that McKellen has as an actor, that he can play one of the most beloved heroes in the cinematic and literature canon, and then he can play one of the most iconic villains, and he can be like the standard for both. And also, it helps that he has just such natural, instantaneous chemistry with Patrick Stewart as Charles Xavier. Obviously, it's well documented that they are, they've known each other since they were both in the Royal Shakespeare Company back in the 70s, but working together on this movie, they became like really good friends in real life. For hell, Ian McKellen officiated Patrick Stewart's wedding. So it's like that, you can see in that, like, that dynamic here, that they are, two forces of personality. Like, one, the old adage about an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. And the only question in this scene is who is playing what role, because they are these two, they seem essentially like forces of nature, or given the image you have up on the screen now, they are the kings on the chessboard. And they're constantly maneuvering around one another. And I think that that's where, like, what I really love about the, what Ian McKellen does as an actor, and especially with this role, is, obviously he gets his, big, iconic, like, malevolent villain, like, speeches and actions, but it's all in the eyes. Like, when you watch him, you can always see that he's processing, he's calculating. Like, as you mentioned, the scene where Sabretooth, brings in Logan's dog tags and tells him about the failed attempt to recover Rogue, as it turns out. And you can just see, Ian McKellen processing that information, and with very minimal dialogue, just like where is the mutant now? With them. And like, it's just like, that is so compelling, even though he's saying like only a couple words there.
Which, by the way, and yeah, we're not going to get into Bryan Singer as a person, because there's because I could, there'd be thoughts there. But I will talk about the way that, like, he plots out and shoots the stuff with, like, when, because Magneto's looking at the dog tags and he says, "Where's the mutant now?" And like, And so we're being clued into right there. I think that they're after
Logan, yeah.
Wolverine, which, of course. And so it's a great sleight of hand. And so when we get to the point later in the movie when, what the hell do you want with me? You dear boy, whoever said I wanted you? And it's a great twist.
Yeah.
And when you're right, the seeds are planted for it, definitely. But yeah, no, they did a really good job with that, and it's all in like, and a lot of it has to do with like Ian McKellen sort of not giving too much away as he's delivering these lines. There's so much, as you said, going on behind the eyes, lots of processing of things, but he's at the same time disguising things as well. And it's just so brilliantly done for the way that performance and writing and the direction all sort of work hand in hand with this to keep certain things close to the chest.
No, and I mean, and you just reminded me of one of my favorite line readings from Ian McKellen, which is in the standoff outside the train station when he is their police are telling him to surrender, and he just has the line, "You Homo sapiens," and you.
Yep. I was watching this today, got to that line, it was like, yep. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I mean that is a case where it's like, yes, Magneto actually is right in that scene.
Isn't that just a sad like testament to how little things have changed? Yeah. Like we don't need to go down that road, but it's just so goddamn frustrating.
Yeah, it is, but I mean, in this scene, like I just this is like a face off between Magneto and Xavier, even though they are not directly face to face. But I do think that like this is probably the scene where Magneto is at his scariest, because in terms of like obviously he has this big malevolent plot and everything, but like when he is essentially threatening these police officers because Xavier is trying to get him to surrender, and then when he uses the gun and fires at one of them and then stops the bullet right there, and then
I love his line reading of "Kind of press your luck, Charles. I don't think I can stop them all."
Yes, exactly. And it's telling that like this is a sacrifice he is clearly willing to make, and he mocks Charles for it later. That why he thinks he's winning in this scene is because he is fully prepared to make those sacrifices, and he believes Charles is not. But in this particular scene, we're seeing like just this is where kind of almost the I'll call it like megalomania of the character does start to show through, because we learn later that his plan essentially is to mutate the world's leaders into people like them, like mutants, so they will be sympathetic to their cause. But then Storm learns that his machine actually doesn't do that. It mutates the humans, but then the mutation is unnatural. Their bodies reject it and they die, as we see with Senator Kelly. And they give this information to Magneto, and he just doesn't absorb it at all. At first, he is just like, well, are you sure that is what you saw? And then he just presses forward with it anyway. And you kind of get the sense that, yes, he wants to, mutate all these world leaders so that they will, join their cause. But if they happen to die, well, that suits his purposes too. And that's really where it makes him a
Well,
villain.
that's interesting, because that is one way to look at it. For me, I don't think, though, he even actually considers that. I think he's plunging ahead, and like all fanatics, like any information that doesn't conform with what he knows to be true and what his plan is, and like he's not even actually really going to consider it. He's like, oh, they're saying this, but it's Doesn't matter. It's not true. They're just trying to stop me. Like, especially like in the real world when we see the amount of like just disbelief of like, you know, hard evidence, you know, that is presented to people. And like, if it doesn't conform to their argument, then it's a lie. They don't care. And so I think that's what's going on with Magneto there.
I agree that is what I'm more focusing on. I just also feel like ultimately if his plan had succeeded and it would have gone through, then he would have found a way to rationalize that as well.
Yeah.
Because as you said, that is kind of, he has formed his worldview, and it's, you know, going to be incredibly hard to change it. And any new information that threatens it and could theoretically cause him to change, he's just not capable at this point of absorbing that. And that, I think, is again one of the things that makes that ultimately kind of shows his true colors, along with the line from Logan where he's again kind of grandstanding about his great plan to the X-Men who he has captured, and Logan has the line, "You're so full of shit. You know, if you were really so righteous, it'd be you in that thing." And he even
one of my
acknowledges
favorite lines.
Yeah, and he acknowledges as much to Rogue when he's grandstanding to her, and he talks about like, your sacrifice will ensure the future of our kind. I'll understand if that comes as small consolation. You know, again, this is where evil actions and evil deeds do make the character, I won't say fully evil, but make him villainous.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh God. It's just that scene where he's talking to Rogue about, seeing the Eiffel Tower, and the way she's like, I've seen it. And which, by the way, like him saying about the first time he saw it, like feels even more impactful to me after having seen The Brutalist, just because of the opening scene of that movie. And, but yeah, it's, oh God. And yeah, the fact that he's fully, like, it's always struck me as really freaking cold the way he just freely acknowledges when she's like, are you going to kill me? The way he just goes, yes. Oh, God.
And when she asks why, he's like, he gives him the idea America was going to be the land of tolerance, but there is no land of
tolerance. Yeah. And
that feels resonant right now.
Yeah. Stuff that felt very like fictional and in a movie 25 years ago to teenage me. Now adult me is like, yeah. See, that's the thing. Like Magneto he is right about people and about like societies. He's just not right about what to do in the face of that. But yeah, there's a line in X-Men 97 where like, and again, people misunderstand the big moment in that when a character says Magneto was right, it's but there's another line in that scene that says, Magneto understands us better than Charles ever did. And I think to a certain degree, you could argue that that is actually true. And I think that Magneto understands human nature. And that's very evident in this scene. Just maybe he's not willing to then look in the mirror and be honest about his own nature. But yeah. Oh God. Okay, let's pause right here and do the mid-roll, and then we're going to talk about some other phenomenal actors and characters. So we're taking a hiatus after this week. Everybody will be back in 3 weeks, but I need a break. I have gotten exhausted, and that culminated in about 2 weeks ago where I just, I could not even, I was feeling like crap, and that's why we didn't do the stream. So yeah, it's just time for a little break. So we'll be back in 3 weeks. But when we come back, we do have I believe we have a couple things scheduled out, which might change slightly. Just depending on like scheduling and guests. Okay, so I see we wrote down the thing for our return. The other stuff is kind of up in the air for now. We're probably going to talk about that after we finish today. But when we come back on August 3rd, the plan is to talk about the absolutely amazing film that came out this year, Sinners, which, yeah, and I've got my beautiful 4K copy over on the shelf over there. I can't quite reach for it, but it's there. That's one of the ones I'm having to like, and I could get into a whole thing about this. I'm having to reevaluate my relationship with physical media, unfortunately. But that is one that there was never any doubt. Like I was going to buy that. It's an absolutely phenomenal film. And yeah, so I can't wait to talk about that. And hopefully we'll have a guest joining us. I actually think we are going to. I just have to respond to them to verify the day that we're doing it on. So we'll that'll probably be a surprise for y'all when when we come back on that week. And then after that, we don't have an order worked out. We are going to work our way back to talking about The Patriot, which had its 25th anniversary this year. That's the one that we were going to talk about when I wasn't feeling great. So we are going to get back around to that. We'll be talking about the latest Marvel big screen movie, Thunderbolts, which I was a big fan of. Another 25th anniversary, we'll be talking about Batman Forever.
30th for that one.
30th anniversary, you're right. Oh, God. Yeah, 30th anniversary. Yeah, and then we're going to come up with a list of some other stuff. And yeah. Yeah, okay, Sinners, yeah. Yeah, I actually did not know about that music. I'm not very knowledgeable about about blues musicians, so I did not realize that like he was a real like big huge musician. So that's a pretty awesome cameo at the end. So yeah, it's just a great movie, and I can't wait to talk about it when we come back. I think it's going to be a great choice for our first stream back, and yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Anything you want to mention while we're doing the mid-roll, Jared?
No. I mean, I'm just like I completely understand the need to take a break. I think we've done 22 or 23 streams this year, so it's been a lot, and we've got a lot more planned. So I think it's a late summer is kind of a good time to take your foot off the gas, relax, maybe go outside. I live in a beautiful location. I'd like to do that a little bit more, but ultimately, I think I'm very happy with what we have coming up. Sinners is going to be an amazing discussion. I think I loved Thunderbolts. It's been rising up my MCU rankings with after I got to rewatch it. And then I really do want to talk about The Patriot, even though like we were trying to kind of trying to time it more with the anniversary release and the 4th of July, but it's still a great movie to talk about, even if we're doing it a couple weeks later. And then Batman Forever will be a lot of fun as well. So
I cannot wait. I said this last week, but I cannot wait to thump my chest about like how much I love Batman Forever. You all can suck it if you disagree. But I'm going to be talking a lot about the reception of that film back when it actually came out.
Yeah.
which is different from what people seem to remember.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about it. It kind of has gotten lumped in with Batman and Robin as like, oh, they're the two Schumacher films, and I'm like, I kind of think people need to reevaluate that because, Batman and Robin can be rough at times, and Batman Forever obviously has its campy elements, but it's a much better movie, and I think that I'm looking forward to celebrating it for those virtues.
And also there's something that I did not mention on those films we will probably discuss. I don't know if it'll be in that, whether we'll wait for the home video release or what, but and you obviously haven't seen it yet, but I think we're going to be talking about Superman.
Yeah, I had a feeling once I saw that you loved it, and I'm going to go get to see it this week. It's been my most anticipated movie of the year, so I'm a little bummed I didn't get to see it this weekend, but I just everything I've heard about it is like this. It sounds like a movie that I'm gonna love. So I'm really, really happy that we will hopefully get to that one in the coming months as well.
Yeah. I don't want to say too much about it until you get a chance to see it. But I had a lot of fun watching that. So looking forward to when you get to see it, just so you and I can have that initial talk before we even do the stream. Because I know you've been looking forward to it a lot, and I feel like it really was the perfect moment for something that's inspiring and hopeful, and it's the reason why I'm also glad in 2 weeks, Fantastic Four is coming out too, because that's another movie that has hope and optimism built into its very fabric, and so I'm looking forward to seeing that as well. This is a busy month for movies, which I'm not upset about. I'm happy. Lots of fun stuff to look forward to when we come back, and looking forward to it. And then just real quick, you guys know I always have my sort of stuff I show off, in the mid-roll for the movie that we're talking about. I want to show that I do have my expanded soundtrack for the film, which just came out a couple of years ago, long overdue. We haven't talked that much yet about Michael Kamen's score for the film. I'm going to say a few words about it because I actually think it's one of the more undervalued elements of the movie. And then also I absolutely hate this cover art because it's a box set for the whole trilogy, and they picked the worst movie to take most of the cover art from. But I do have my 4K edition of the X-Men trilogy. I just hate the fact that they use X3 art for most of it.
I have the Blu-ray version of that as well. But yeah, you know what? X3 is part of the trilogy. There are some elements of it that I enjoy, but yeah, on the power ranking of the 13 movies that Fox made in the X-Men universe, it's at the bottom or close to.
I'll tell you the truth though. Actually, I also bought, years back, I bought steelbook editions of the first 2 films, and I've actually removed the 4K discs from that box, and I put it in the steelbook version for the individual films, which is much better. So yeah. Okay, so speaking of the film, let's jump back in. We've talked about Hugh Jackman. We've talked about Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart. We have talked about Anna Paquin. I want to next talk about Famke Janssen as Jean Grey. Mostly, first of all, because she's absolutely amazing. Second of all, because I will confess I was really excited when she was announced as Jean Grey, because this was coming off of knowing her from GoldenEye, which I had such an enormous crush slash terror of her from that. Sometimes those things go hand in hand. But I was really excited that she was being cast in Jean Grey, and I love that. Like, obviously, she wasn't gonna, play Jean Grey like Xenia on the top, but but this was such a different, kind of role for her, and I thought she just did an absolutely amazing job. And let me pull up, there she is. And yeah, I just thought she nailed it. And it's tinged with a little bit of sadness because I feel like she didn't get the Phoenix story that she deserved.
Yeah.
But in terms of like this film, she just does an amazing job, as well as in X2. And honestly, she's great. Even in the third movie, it's just her material that isn't, up to par. But she just did such a fantastic job. And again, like I was talking about the costume design earlier, like, I'm just gonna say, like, she looks absolutely fantastic in her outfits throughout this movie, even in like something as simple as like, her suit in the Senate hearing. There's a scene later on where she's talking to Logan, just like, it's just like a fairly normal shirt, but like the costume design is just fantastic in the movie. And just and the way she played the role is just, one of the big parts of these movies is this sort of tension with her. Obviously she has a relationship with Scott, who she cares about very deeply, but then there's the flirtation between her and Logan, which is always very fun. And they got to do something a bit different in the movies than, like, say, in the animated series, where it's like, it's mostly Wolverine who's carrying the torch in the animated series. And whereas in the films, it feels like things are a bit more complicated, where she does have feelings for Logan. But, it's, and I would have liked to see all that play out differently than it does in X3. It's Cyclops got the raw end of the deal with these movies for sure. But no, I love how she's like, especially in terms of her dynamic with Logan. I love how she gives as good as she gets with him. I love, there's a moment where, he's like, so, couldn't wait to get my shirt off again, huh? And she just gives him this look and then shoves him right into the machine. But yeah, and I love, like, she's great in the opening, Senate scene where she's trying to sort of remain, sort of cool and calm and collected, even with the absolutely awful Senator Kelly doing his grandstanding. And I don't know. It's just, I was really happy with her performance. I think she gets to do even better stuff in X2. Definitely one of my favorite performers in the films.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love her as Jean Grey, especially in X2. I mean, and in many respects, X2 is kind of like her movie. And I know you said she doesn't get the full Phoenix story to the extent we would want in like X3, but we get the beginnings of it in X2, which is, I think, one of the reasons that we were all looking forward to that so much. But in this movie, she is just, Jean Grey. But that's enough, because, oh man. I will, the character is obviously like iconic. I will just own up to the fact that, like, when I talk about like early cinematic crushes, I always go back to Natalie Portman as Padme Amidala, kind of being, and then obviously our beloved Keira Knightley as Elizabeth Swann. Famke Janssen as Dr. Jean Grey was on that one. And quite solidly so, because I was not really prepared for just how stunning I would find her in these movies. But as you said, it's the performance is more than that. and we talked earlier about about Ian McKellen and how well he uses his eyes. Talk about an actor who knows how to use their eyes. Famke Janssen just communicates so much, both in the intense scenes like this one, where she's facing off against the Brotherhood, but then also in her interactions with Logan, the kind of like the small, twitches of her mouth that let you know that, like, yes, she is enjoying this flirtatious dynamic, perhaps a little bit more than she is comfortable acknowledging out loud, given her love for Scott. But and then like the intensity, like in this scene where Logan is kind of teasing her a little bit, but ultimately when he's talking about like well then read my mind, and she's like I'd rather not, and he's like why? Afraid you might like what you find here.
And her voice cracks, and she's like, I doubt it.
Yeah, I doubt it. But then she does it, and obviously the point of the scene is she kind of unearths his some of his trauma from the Alkali Lake, but like that scene where she kind of is using her telepathy and kind of has her hands kind of gently resting on either side of his face, in a very convenient place for Scott to walk in and see him, obviously, which gives a great joke later with the you're going to tell me to stay away from your girl. If I had to do that, she wouldn't be my girl. But Logan, stay away from my girl. Which we'll get to James Marsden in a second, but Famke Janssen, just one of obviously the things about Jean Grey is that she is perhaps the most powerful mutant of them all, even though she has not unlocked that part of herself yet. But we get to see the hints of like just that she's still discovering that what she can do with her power, and right. But in the beginning of the movie, as you said, one of her most effective scenes is we see her in the Senate, facing off against Senator Kelly, and essentially making a case for tolerance and inclusion and safety for her kind, for mutants. And obviously, Senator Kelly's using it as an opportunity to grandstand. But she doesn't get into a shouting match with him. She is just trying to make her case the right way through reason, that the idea that people will get hurt if we force these mutants to, register. And obviously Senator Kelly kind of, knows that and doesn't really care because he's got other, a different perspective on his mind. But I just find like the way that she carries herself in that scene to be incredibly effective. And then some of the scenes like later in the movie when after the professor has, been incapacitated by the corrupted Cerebro, and she has to kind of step up and become not quite the leader of the team, but like one of an essential member of it out in the field, and seeing her start to develop those skills is just really thrilling to watch. And again, I do think that X2 is really the movie where Jean Grey as the character and Famke Janssen really get to shine, but she leaves an impression in this movie, definitely, just from what we have here.
Yeah. A little bit funny thing about that Senate scene is because and Bruce Davidson does such a great job of being detestable as Senator Kelly, but he does have sort of a unintentionally funny beat here, which is like it's because in all the trailers for the movie started off with the speech by Gene talking about ladies and gentlemen, we've begun the first stages of a new stage of human evolution, and then she says her sentence about these mutations manifest at puberty and are often triggered by periods of heightened emotional stress. And like we had just heard the first part of that speech so often in the trailers that like by the time we actually saw the movie, it we knew it verbatim. And so the fact that Senator Kelly so quickly goes, "Thank you, Miss Gray, that was quite educational," it just felt like a meta joke, even though it wasn't intended as such. But it's like, yes, we've heard that. Thank you. But yeah. But speaking of Bruce Davidson, as Senator Kelly, he definitely like represents the worst that humanity has to offer, and is a character that is very recognizable today. And again, it's one of those things where this all felt very fictional, and movie verse, back in 2000, to me at least. And I was living a very privileged existence, to be sure. Nowadays it has a different feel to it, and we see him making these proclamations in front of the Senate, and it's just very very disturbing and very haunting. And the political figure all too eager to throw to other people who are different, for the sake of maybe for the sake of his political career, and also just because he has a general hatred for people who are different. And it feels real world in a way that it felt a little bit more removed back in 2000, and not so anymore. And like, as much as I despise Senator Kelly, Bruce Davidson just does such a brilliant job. Unfortunately, it's very hard to see him playing anything other than a villain now. It's why, like, he has a guest role in an episode of Battlestar Galactica where he plays a doctor who is actually hurting patients. And right from the beginning of the episode, I was like, yeah, no, he's totally doing that. Whereas he also had a guest role in an episode of Lost where he plays Hurley's doctor, who actually does care about him. But I was suspicious about him the whole time. It's because he does such a great job playing a real son of a bitch. And even though, but the movie also does a good job of, like, when he's placed in a position where he's no longer on top and he's now suffering, it shows these sort of little cracks where he's willing to be slightly more open-minded, but only because now he's going through something, and he's potentially opened up to, like, people like him, and who are then going to judge him. And so it doesn't really make him that much more sympathetic to actually, like, saying, no, you were an asshole, and now we're getting to see slight shades of humanity only because your situation has changed. But even then, he's still like, he doesn't end his existence by saying, I'm sorry. He says, well, now you've got one less human to be afraid of. Like, that's nowhere near an apology. That's and so I think it's a great character, just like, but he sucks. And you get that right from the moment he pops up on screen. This is not a character you're designed to have any, like, real affection for, outside of the fact that he's brilliantly portrayed by the actor.
Yeah, no, I mean, he is a demagogue, like, plain and simple. He is. I do the most credit I'll give him in the early stages before his transformation is that I do think he actually does believe some of what he is trying to sell, which is the idea that mutants could be dangerous. Like him talking about the girl who could walk through walls and possibly into a bank or into the White House, or a mutant who can control their thoughts. Like, it's not unreasonable for people to have questions about something like that, particularly when it's so new. But the way he goes about it makes it clear that he is coming at this from a place of not not just genuine concern, but of like fear and intolerance and a desire to use that fear and intolerance and weaponize the fear of intolerance of others to hope perhaps grandstand his way into a bigger position. As he says later, like, this is a war. It's why people like me exist. And I like one of the elements I find most effective about that early confrontation with Jean Grey is where, you know, he's like, 3 words, are mutants dangerous? And she has the response, that's an unfair question, Senator Kelly. After all, the wrong person behind the wheel of a car can be dangerous. And he kind of shrugs and is like, well, we license people to drive. And her retort, yes, but not to live. And you can tell that, like, this is a case where Dr. Grey is, you know, she's trying to meet him on his, you know, terms of like, you know, I understand your concerns, but this is why your approach is the wrong way. And he, of course, seizes on that moment to turn it into a big grandstanding, like, speak to the crowd kind of speech with the whole, again, talking about like mutants could take away control our minds and our thoughts, take away our God-given fair free will. But then now I think the American people deserve the right to decide if they want their children to be in school with mutants, to be taught by mutants. Ladies and gentlemen, the truth is that mutants are very real and that they are among us. We must know who they are, and above all, we must know what they can do. And he's just, you can tell that he has planned this moment and is just, you know, milking it for all it's worth. And that makes him not only, you know, detestable, it makes him like very obviously a direct analog to real world political figures who get by on, you know, demagoguing others and rising to, you know, using it to further their own power. And I think you're right to point out that he doesn't truly get like a redemption story of any kind. I do think that he obviously undergoes a change when he is afflicted by, you know, the radiation from Magneto's machine and becomes a mutant himself temporarily. And we see his horror at that, because what happens to him is horrifying, you know, even, you know, just on its surface, you know, but it also is telling that, you know, when he goes to, you know, the mansion, you know, he does so, you know, not to like say I apologize or understands, because he's afraid that he'll be persecuted now. And he recognizes on some deep level that these people who he had been demagoguing, you know, will still help him, you know, and that almost makes it worse that he was doing it before. And the most I will say is that like the hints of change that we get for him at the end have me wanting to believe that if he had lived, perhaps he would have become a better person from this. But as you said, he doesn't really get that chance. And his final moments with Storm, even though it's like, you know, we feel for him on a human level because this man is about to die in a very horrifying way. But it wasn't truly a moment where he was seeking contrition. He was seeking comfort, you know. And so in that respect, he was kind of selfish, you know, to the end.
Yeah. Oh, God. But yeah, I will say, like, this is what I love about the very nature of like characters and the actors who play them, because at no point is Senator Kelly anything less than a fascinating character.
Yeah.
And even though, like, you know, he is despicable and we despise him, but the writing and the way that Bruce Davidson plays him, it's just like, you know, the fact that we do end up like having some level of like sympathy combined with also comeuppance to a certain extent, but this feeling of that we're with him in those moments where he is looking for comfort, you know, in his last moments. Like that all works because he's a compelling character, even as he's an awful person. But also what it does is like the character is so well defined that it then, and watch how I seamlessly transition here. It makes those moments where like he's you know, in private when he's talking about, his own personal beliefs, which are absolutely awful. It's, when he says, we're Americans, Henry, let the rest of the world deal with mutants in their own damn way, which of course brings up lots of real world things. But then it turns when he realizes they're not necessarily where they're supposed to be. It's like, where the hell are we? And it turns out that it is not his assistant. It is actually Mystique, and we see the absolutely brilliant performance via or transformation via CGI into the absolutely stunning on several levels. Paint job, whatever, everything that they did to get the Misty look, which unfortunate for her because she had to go through hell in these early days of crafting the look for Mystique. But we are introduced to Rebecca Romijn as the character of Mystique, and like what a, and I'm being serious here, like one of the like all-time great entrances where he sees her, screams, he's like, pilot, and she like through acrobatics like knocks him back in his seat, uses her legs to grab hold of his neck, and says, people like you are the reason I was afraid to go to school as a child, and then kicks him unconscious. And like it's just an absolutely phenomenal entrance. Aside from I'm an elephant in the room, yes, she looks absolutely phenomenal and gorgeous. And for a teenager, I was like, oh my god, she's naked.
Yeah.
And but I just she's another one of the characters in this film that is just like great. She doesn't say much throughout the film, but it's her presence and her like physicality, especially later on when we get the fight with her and Wolverine, and like and I don't know how much of that is her, and like I know there's got to be stunt doubles involved in a lot of that, but even so, like with a lot of the close-up stuff, just the way she's like presenting herself and some of those facial expressions, and like it's a really great performance, and I think that this is another character where she gets to do even better stuff in the second film, because we actually get a lot more into her character in that one. And then it's also like paved the way for not necessarily what she got to do, but setting up this is the proto version of the character that we eventually also get to dive really deeply into when Jennifer Lawrence plays her in the later films. And I just think that the characters had a really interesting journey, across the films. Because and certainly I never would have guessed in this film that we would have tackled the notion of her and Charles as adopted brother and sister, but even in just this film, like she's just an amazing presence, and and like there's no disguising, Rebecca Romijn is an absolutely gorgeous woman. So there was the appeal on that level, but I also think she does absolutely tremendous work.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it's nice that she does get to play the character like in her own skin, like in the second and third movies briefly. But yeah, the performance, Mystique is obviously like she's probably one of the most like indelible images from this movie, because of the look of the character is so like alien. The blue skin, the yellow eyes, the red hair, the almost impossible way she moves with like such light flexibility. The way she smiles, like those like brilliant white teeth like coming out of this face that in a certain respect just could seem like almost like monstrous or devilish, to somebody who doesn't understand who she is.
Yeah, just like even in this scene where there's so much shrouded in darkness, those eyes just pierce through, and it's and it's certainly a different like version of Mystique from what had been like in the comics and the animated series, and you can look at that sort of cynically of like, of course they like had her basically nude, but you use the word alien. There is something very almost alien about her, and I loved what they did with her eyes in particular, just because there's something very like unnerving and and scary. And I'm certainly like, it's funny to something that felt so different from what was established back when they did it, but now like when people think of Mystique, they certainly do think of this version of the character a lot. That's one of the virtues of like, doing something different, but then after 25 years, it's become in its own way part of the canon.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I will own up to the fact that I wasn't as familiar with Mystique's history in the comics before I saw this movie. So like, this was the version of the character, and then when I went back and saw like, oh no, she actually has a much different, history and things, then like, I mean, obviously that would have been cool to see, but like as the character in this movie, I think she fulfills the role incredibly well as kind of Magneto's right-hand woman, the one who is probably every bit as committed to the cause as he is. And obviously, as you said, that kind of gets complicated later when we learn of her backstory with Charles, but it also means her choice ultimately to go with Eric hits a little bit harder. And in this movie, she is just, she's almost a force of nature. One, because she can transform into almost anyone. But also because even when she's not transformed, she's incredibly capable. She gives Wolverine all that he can handle. And
oh my god, that fight scene is insane. Just with the acrobatics she does when she's like climbing up like a pole backwards and shit and all this stuff and the way she's like, she's like holding his arms and then twisting, her legs up, underneath and like taking him down. And like, it's a freaking awesome, like a fight scene. And it's great.
Yeah, no, and I mean, and she doesn't, even though, as you said, she doesn't get a ton of dialogue in this movie. She is more almost like a silent killer in many respects. But Rebecca Romijn still injects those wonderful moments of personality, like the moment when she's fighting Wolverine and then he knocks her down and then she looks back at him and she licks her lips, which is kind of setting up that like she's enjoying, like she even though they're fighting and she's trying to kill him, she's also kind of like, God damn. And they play with that obviously in X2 a little bit.
But... And also like that shot is certainly a good shot. There's no way not to. So I'm trying to be as respectful as possible, but different, also a different time. Like this is what they were putting on screen, but yeah, no, you're right. That is definitely setting up something that they did more with in the second film. And you mentioned the fact that she actually gets a little bit of time in the second film to actually play the role in her own skin as as she really is, and which I also thought was nice. And there's also that great moment in X-Men First Class when when Mystique actually transforms into the Rebecca Romijn version. And they got to have some fun with that stuff with the Mystique character. But yeah, no, she's fun, and and again, talking about, the fact that she doesn't get that much to say, but if all she said was her opening line to Kelly, like that is a banger of of a line of dialogue, and also like really just hammers home, you know, the issues of this film, and also why she is such a fearsome, you know, person to contend with, because this is someone who has grown up having to be afraid. And yeah, it's great. So I love her. Now shifting back over to our good guys for a second, because I don't want to bury Cyclops at the end, because he deserves better than that. I will admit, this is not my, like, the movie version of Cyclops is not my favorite version of Cyclops, but it's only because I feel like he really did not get, you know, the screen time that he deserved across these movies. None of that is James Marsden's fault. I think he does a really good job playing this version of the character, and particularly in this film, and like in X2, he's taken out of commission for a lot of it, and then the less said about X3, the better. But I do like his stuff here, especially his, like, you know, back and forth with Logan, you know, and then I think you alluded to it earlier. There's that great moment when, after Xavier has been taken out, and you know, and he's just standing over, and he says, you know, he has the line of dialogue that something to the effect of, you know, you taught me everything in my life that was ever worth knowing. I just want you to know that if anything happens, I'll take care of them. And, you know, I think it just speaks to their relationship, which was such a big thing in the animated series. And so we get little hints of it. I like to think that there's an alternate, you know, an alternate reality where where his art got fleshed out more throughout later throughout the films. But I still think James Marsden does a really good job playing the role. I just wish he was given more to do.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's one of the reasons I was very happy to hear that he is one of the cast members who's coming back for Avengers Doomsday, because we were kind of going to get a new lease on life for the character. Because in this trilogy of movies, I can certainly understand how people feel like the character of Cyclops is a bit underserved, because in the animated series that you mentioned, he is kind of like the leader of the X-Men when Xavier is not around.
And like, I know a lot of people give animated Cyclops grief for, one, he's a total Boy Scout, which he is, and like, that's Cyclops. And also, it does become a running joke that he passes out frequently in the original animated series. Ari and I were having a lot of fun with that on a rewatch. But I love Cyclops in the animated series, because he is like a take charge, you know, leader of the team. And the fact, and I love the fact that he's a Boy Scout, that he's always trying to do what's right, and sort of by the book, and like, because like, you know, if I was tall and muscular and had lasers pointing out of my firing out of my eyes, like, I would hope that's the kind of, you know, X-Men team leader I would be. You know, he always did feel like my kind of leader, and so that was a high bar for me for that character. And yeah, and he didn't quite measure up here, just because, I mean, let's just say it, the movies basically became the Wolverine show, and like, even though he wasn't the leader of the team per se, he was the focal point of the movies, and that is not what Wolverine had been in other iterations. And so Cyclops, just by the very nature of that, kind of got pushed to the side, and I am hoping for a little bit of redemption for the Cyclops in the Avengers movies coming up. And at the very least, I'd like them to move in a more sort of comic accurate, animated series accurate, iteration for whatever comes next after that. But again, I still like Cyclops in these movies. It's just we didn't get enough of it.
Yeah. And the thing about James Marsden's performance is he plays Ernest incredibly well. And like you never doubt where this character's heart lies, particularly in his obviously fierce love and loyalty to Jean, but also to the professor. And as you said, the movie almost kind of incentivizes us to root against Cyclops in a weird way because, I mean, Hugh Jackman and Famke Janssen have a lot of chemistry, and there's kind of a fun element of their kind of flirtatious dynamic. And then Scott is a little bit more like, rigid. So it's not as easy to root for him and his dynamic with Jean. But the moments when they're together and you can see the true love that's built between the characters who have known each other for most of their lives. They were, along with Storm, some of Xavier's first students. I think that James Marsden plays that incredibly well, particularly in the second movie when.
I was just about to say, I in particular love that scene in the beginning of the second film between them, where it really shows how much they care for each other. But I just have this picture because I just love that, like, this is their first true interaction, and I just love the fact that Cyclops is actually pretty open at this point to just being nice to the guy, and he's extending his hand, and like Wolverine's not going to be having any of that. And he pretty much, and Cyclops gets his number after this scene. He's like, okay, so this is the dynamic we're going to have.
I mean, and that like obviously his kind of rivalry with Logan in that respect does give the character a little bit more of a harder edge at times, like when Logan is making fun of him and like kind of teasing that like he's like the whole stay away from my girl scene, and then Cyclops has the line it must just gall you that like a Boy Scout like me basically saved your life, and you're gonna have to essentially deal with that. And he shuts Logan up, in that scene. But it's like you get the sense that like he obviously doesn't like or trust Logan. There's that scene with the professor where he surmises as much. I am psychic. I can tell these things.
Oh my god! Like I just need to say the whole thing because I love it so much. You don't like him. How could you tell? Well, I am psychic.
Yes,
it's so great.
It's so great, and I will say that for my money, James Marsden as Cyclops gets this movie's single funniest line, which is after the Mystique confrontation when Logan comes back and he is like pointing his laser at him, and Logan's like, "Hey, it's me. Prove it. You're a dick." Okay.
Oh
this makes me cackle every time I watch it.
And then the earlier moments when they go through the metal detector and it goes off Logan and he shortens all his claws except for the middle one. And the fact that Cyclops actually laughs at that. He's actually, which goes to show that, like, at least I think he's really enjoying their dynamic, actually. I think he's amused by it, except for when Logan takes his bike.
Oh, that is a line that you do not cross. You do not touch Scott Summers' motorcycle. And that's the like in the beginning of the second movie when Logan brings it back and the whole like, aren't you going to welcome me home? Your bike needs gas. Then fill her
up. And then when they actually show Logan on the bike and he's looking down at the button, he's like, do I press it? Do I press it? Oh, I'm gonna press it. Shows it speeding up and then just cuts back to this wide, silly grin on his face. So great. I love it.
Yeah, no, I mean, so again, like James Marsden gets those great moments, like perhaps just with not quite as much material as one would have liked. He does get the heroic shot that takes out Magneto at the end of this
Yeah.
this movie. So, but yeah, my single favorite moment is absolutely the prove it, you're a dick. Okay, just it makes me laugh every time.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, and let's talk about another team member that kind of feels like a character in development in this movie. She gets to soar, no pun intended, a lot more in the second film,
Oh yeah,
which is Storm, played
yeah.
by Halle Berry. I feel like they were trying some stuff out with this movie. It didn't quite work. Um, they had her trying to do like, the African accent, for this one. The hairstyle didn't quite
Mm-hmm.
didn't quite gel. But that said, she still has some great moments throughout the film. I love her, like when she confronts Logan
Mm-hmm.
about like fighting with them.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually one of the most iconic moments of the film. I love it. Uh, you know, then help us, fight with us. And he says, "What? Join the team, be an X-Man." Um, and it's a really great scene. And he thinks like he has the final word on that, and she's like, "At least I've chosen a side."
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and but yeah, and then she gets the unfortunate, you know, what happens to a toad when it gets struck by lightning line, which will go down in infamy. I don't know. I was never super bothered by but in retrospect, it is weird. But
It is. I mean, it's not the
yeah,
movies. Like, I think this movie has a pretty great script overall. That's not its finest moment. But
yeah,
it is awesome to see Storm with all of her power, like with the eyes and the arms billowing out and the lightning coming down. Like, she looks badass and is carrying herself like one of the most powerful, an Omega level mutant, as they say in the animated series, should. Um,
yeah,
and I've always really loved Halle Berry's performance in these movies. Even when her as you said, X2 is really where she gets to shine. Her dynamic with Nightcrawler is just wonderful and some of the best
yeah,
stuff in the entire franchise. Um, but in this movie, like I still think she has some moments where we get to see like the incredible heart that this character has. We had talked about that scene with Senator Kelly when he's dying, and Storm is there at the end. But that moment where he's asking her like, "Do you hate normal people?" and she says sometimes, and he says why, and her response is, "I suppose I'm afraid of them." Like I think that that's actually a great moment of acting from Halle Berry, and also the moments where we're seeing her kind of come into her power in like she obviously struggled a little bit in the initial confrontation, but once she's unleashed, she is it's a just thrilling to watch. And this is where I was like, when the Avengers Doomsday cast list came out, and like there were a lot of names on there. The one that I was personally most disappointed not to see on there was Halle Berry as Storm, because I was like, she deserves to come back. And I hope they're just like saving her for a reveal, or maybe she'll be in Secret Wars. Because I really don't think like the X-Men can be the X-Men without Storm. So yeah,
yeah. No, that list definitely felt like it's a weird thing to say with so many names in that cast announcement, but it does feel like certain names are being held back.
yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. And I maintain also that even if certain people aren't in that film, there's a second one.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, we'll see. Um, and then I love getting to see her also teach the students.
Yeah.
Um, Even though it's more background to like the interaction between Bobby and Rogue, and and the funny moment when with early Pyro before he's recast for the second film, where he's goofing around and Bobby chooses to teach him a lesson. But yeah, it's just nice to see that, especially because it kind of feeds into what we get from Rogue later on down the series when we've seen her with the students, and and even like taking, even though I hate alluding to X3, but like taking, charge of the school, after Xavier's first death.
How many of those is he on now?
Yeah.
I think at least 3.
Oh God, my favorite like interview moment with Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen when it was the two of them and Hugh Jackman on the Graham Norton show, and it's like, and Graham Norton was like, "Why aren't you in this one?" And Ian McKellen's like, "Well, don't you know, there comes a time when you want to leave those tired old franchises behind." And then he's like, "No, actually, I don't know why I'm not in this one." And then he turns to Patrick Stewart and he says, "And honestly, it's time you died." And like, he doesn't say it's time you died in the movie. He just says, "It's time you died."
Oh, okay.
And he's like, "In fact, you did die." And Patrick Stewart goes, "Yes, I was vaporized by Jean Grey."
Yes.
But that's how
And then he got better, because that's the way these movies work. That's why any character who has died in this franchise, I still think like they can come back in Doomsday. Like hell, get Famke Janssen as Jean Grey in Doomsday too.
But yeah, no. So yeah, I like Halle Berry in this. I think she was a great choice for Storm. It's kind of colored by the fact that she really gets a soar in the second film.
Yeah.
If like, so I'm like judging, her role in this one perhaps a bit unfairly, just because I think she's better served by X2, but but there's still a lot of fun stuff in this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that takes care of like the major characters. There's a couple other ones that I do want to mention. Shifting back over to the villains for a second, we have both the Sabretooth and Toad, played by Ray Park. Which, again, if you if you needed a time capsule of things, it's like that feels like such an out of left field thing, but it made sense like in the moment, just because they were going to have this character be very like acrobatic and he's jumping around a lot, and so it's the year after the Phantom Menace, so of course Ray Park's our man. But my only experience with Toad had been in the first attempt at an X-Men animated series, which was a pilot called Pride of the X-Men. And Toad is such a weird little character in that. So when they announced Ray Park, I was like, what? But yeah, no, he's fun. He adds a lot of personality, and like he gets to do more, in this than like as far as like showing himself off, arguably, than he did with Darth Maul. He certainly gets more lines. And then Tyler Mane is Sabretooth. I may not actually have a picture of him in this. But yeah, he does a great job, and like I was definitely coming from the animated series where I'm like, you know, why don't him and Wolverine know each other? Like, why don't they have their dynamic? And actually, I ended up really enjoying what they did with the character for X-Men Origins Wolverine. It may be one of the only things about that movie that is legitimately good, which is the casting of Sabretooth and the dynamic between those two characters. I was actually upset that they didn't do that version of the character for Deadpool and Wolverine, but now I understand why they did, because it was just going to be a really quick joke. But that said, like, this is another one of those characters where like they wanted the physicality, and like he does a great job of like, you know, of being a beast essentially. I do love that aside at the end of the movie with the news report saying the body of, you know, Senator Kelly's aide, Henry Gyrick, was discovered. Gyrick was mauled by a bear. It's like,
but, which that's an interesting aside from the animated series, because you know Henry Gyrick plays a big role in the animated series, and watching this time I was like, oh shit, is that meant to be a reference? But clearly he's not like playing the same version of the character, because he gets mauled to death by Sabretooth. But
yeah, no, it's I mean, not much to say. He's he's pretty much just a heavy, you know, and in this, and he gets, you know, he's basically an opponent for Wolverine. They have a great fight at the end, and I absolutely love that with their fight, we get Wolverine actually saying, "Hey, bub."
No, I mean it is retrospectively a little, you know, it's not strange, but like given the dynamic that's established between them in X-Men Origins Wolverine, like that clearly here that had not yet been laid down, but it is like, you know, he's still a very physical opponent for him. And I like, you know, that opening scene has one of the more comic booky like moments of violence when Sabretooth attacks Wolverine and he picks up a tree branch and he like hits Wolverine and he knocks him like 30 feet in the air and he lands back on the wall. And that's when you're like, this movie is grounded, but it can still do like shit like that. That's really fun.
By the way, like one of the great comedic moments of the entire movie before Sabretooth comes out, when Wolverine and Rogue are in the truck and driving the road's just like, you know, you should wear your seatbelt. And he's like, listen, kid, I don't need advice on auto safety. Then the tree comes down and he goes flying out the window. Which would be horrific for any like human character. But of course, he just ends up shrugging that off. So
because which it makes sense why he wouldn't think he needs a seatbelt, but clearly you do. Safety first, kid. But yeah, I mean, like, so I do think that their fight at the top of the Statue of Liberty is really, really good as well. And circling back to Toad for a minute, like this was another thing. Like when I first saw this movie, I didn't clock that it was Ray Park, you know, aka Darth Maul, who I had just been blown away by a year earlier. So that was kind of another like later discovery for me. And it also answered the question for me, the humorous question of, you know, like Darth Maul, famously Ray Park does the physicality, but he's voiced by Peter Serafinowicz and then later Sam Witwer. And it's like, why didn't Ray Park do the voice? And then you go watch this movie and Toad opens his mouth and a giant like Cockney accent comes out. Like, he's like, quit playing around. And you're like, oh, that's why. but it's still a really great performance, you know, especially with the physical aspects, because we see that like you wouldn't think that a mutant that looks like a little toad is would be that dangerous, but he like, you know, he breaks Cyclops' visor, he like almost smothers Jean Grey, he gives Storm all he can handle before she electrocutes him and sends him flying off into the
don't you people ever die.
No, I love Ray Park, so I'm very happy to see him in this movie, and I was glad he got to showcase some of his martial arts skills before he got, fried.
Oh, I love when he's got like the crowbar and he does that like twirl around and like this. It's like that was his Darth Maul moment for the movie.
Yeah.
Oh God. So yeah, and then somebody else that we haven't talked about. I mentioned him briefly, but Bobby, Iceman, who doesn't really get to, he's just, he gets a little bit part in this, but then he gets to step up to the plate more in the second film. But this is what we call world building and setting the stage for these characters here. He gets the unfortunate distinction of being the dude that Mystique impersonates to make Rogue feel really bad and run away.
Yeah, that which is such a heartbreaking scene. Of course, it's the fact that it is Mystique, explains it away. And because like this is as with many characters, actually, Shawn Ashmore as Bobby, as Iceman, gets much more to do in the second movie. And like, obviously the scene with his parents in X2 is considered like one of the staples for the franchise. That's where the allegory is like literally impossible. But yeah, but in this movie, just like he does have a sweet dynamic with Rogue. You can see the beginnings of what their relationship will become. Although Gambit is nowhere to be seen, neither Taylor, neither the Taylor Kitchener or the Channing Tatum version. So perhaps he has more of a chance than he would have otherwise. But also the and yes, it is also, you mentioned, like, it is funny to see like the versions of some of these characters that we'll get to know later in the series where they hadn't like cast the main actors that will portray them later. Like we get Proto Kitty. I think we have to get two versions of Kitty before we get Ellen, at the time now Elliot Page, in the role, and then we get Proto Pyro, as you mentioned. I think we get Proto Colossus walking around somewhere. So it's like, yeah, this is a case where it's like they were just here to be background characters.
I think there's even a Jubilee.
There is a Jubilee,
in there, yeah. Which we never really got in like the in this trilogy. We got a Jubilee in X-Men Apocalypse, I think. A lot of these characters are still waiting to be done justice in the next version, in the MCU version of X-Men, which actually, like, I've really started to get more and more excited about what they're gonna do. Because, but yeah. So yeah, I think we've covered like all the characters. I mean, I will just touch on some like big moments throughout the film. I do want to say, like, we talked about the train scene between Rogue and Wolverine, which is so beautiful, but then it's followed up by a big, like, an action set piece where where Magneto comes in to take Rogue, and it's the big twist reveal that he's after Rogue and instead of Logan. But what's great about that scene is it's a and when we not as big of a like homage as we ended up getting in X-Men 97, but like it is definitely tipping its cap to the moment in the comics where Magneto pulls Logan's adamantium out of his body, and with him basically stopping Wolverine in his tracks, and it says, "That remarkable metal doesn't run through your entire body, does it?" Which is a darkly humorous moment. And but my other line that I love in that scene, and this is the part of Magneto's character that becomes more that resonates more and more with me as I get older, is when when Road goes to run away, and then he sends out like the knife to like to take her out, and he just shakes his head and goes, "Young people."
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because when I was watching the movie at last night and we got to that like young people line, I actually thought I'm like, I bet Gwen is going to talk about this on the street tomorrow, because it aligns a lot with the back, what we were talking about of like, this movie 25 years ago versus now, and just your eternal struggle with the aging process,
Yeah.
But I'm like, that feels apt. It's a great line though.
Well, of course, then there's the whole thing of like, 25 years ago, it's like, Ian McKellen was like an old geezer in this, and he's actually more kind of like, this is Ian McKellen in his young hunk phase, actually. But yeah, and then we talked about the moment, when with the cops and the guns, and that line of you Homo sapiens and your guns, uh, sorry, but just that whole standoff between him and Charles, it's really tackling those the ideas of the film, which for me, like I said, that's what drives this movie more so than in the action sequences, is this question between these two characters of like, what's the right path forward in the face of oppression. And just their whole exchange, and they're still unwilling to make sacrifices. That's what makes you weak. And it's actually not. It's Charles is operating from he's showing great strength, by by choosing the more difficult path. I always said I hate when like I hate when certain positions are attacked for being the weaker like path, or showing weakness, or just because it's not the like because it's a position that carries more like personal risk with it, like violence is actually easier. Um, it's it's not quite on the same like the same thing, but I'll take any opportunity to talk about Game of Thrones. But it's one of the things that I always hate when people like talk about like Ned Stark being dumb or making dumb decisions. It's like he walks into that throne room in episode 7, fully knowing that there's a pretty big chance he's fucked. He's hoping that he's not, and he's hoping that he's chosen correctly, and that, God help us all, Littlefinger will actually come through with his word, which I don't think he necessarily believes completely that's going to happen. He's hoping that it does, but he's fully accepting that he could walk out of this situation having lost. And I think that takes enormous strength of character. And when you see him walking into that throne room, that is the look of a man who, like, he's fully aware of the risk that he's taking in that scene. And so I hate it when people call Ned Stark like stupid or dumb, because I actually think he's incredibly brave in that moment. And so it's the same kind of thing here, where somehow the idea of choosing a non-violent path is somehow being weak, and I despise that argument.
Yeah.
I actually think it takes incredible strength, and bravery and resolve. It's much easier to just say, "Oh, I'm going to kill all my enemies," and yeah. So it's justice for Professor X, because I think he has the much more difficult path to walk.
I agree. I think we touched on this, a similar dynamic of like defending Professor X's worldview in when we did our X-Men 97 discussion as well, because, you know, you're absolutely right. Like we talked about earlier in the stream that, you know, this is the harder path to walk. The path of righteousness often is the harder path to walk. And it's much easier to, you know, lash out and, you know, take direct action against the people who are, you know, being cruel and oppressive to you. And I think that that is again where a lot of audience members find themselves sympathizing with Magneto, is because they're like, well, why don't you just do something? Why are you trying to help these people who, you know, hate and fear you? But I think it's, you know, this is where we actually get to see the power of the philosophy. And we talked about loving the fact that, you know, he has set up this school for kids to protect them, you know, and as also that, you know, I find myself thinking about, again, always going back to Star Wars, you know, Yoda's philosophy about the, like, is the dark side stronger? No, quicker, easier, more seductive. And that's true in the real world as it is in this movie. And Xavier, you know, he knows that there is a potential cost to what he's doing. Like, he's not saying that his way is a guaranteed success, but as he says, he is looking for hope. And he ultimately, I think, finds it.
And also, like, I think that that's like laid bare in that last exchange of the movie, when, like, which is so utterly talked about, beautifully written. You know, and, you know, Eric says, "Doesn't it wake you in the middle of the night? The feeling that someday they'll pass that foolish law, or one just like it, and come for you and your children." And Professor X responds, "It does indeed." It's like, so he's fully aware that that's where the things could lead. And so it takes an enormous amount of faith and strength to hold the line, and to, you know, and to keep moving forward in hope, instead of giving in to your fear. Which, you know, and fear is a thing that gets talked about much. With the humanity fears what it doesn't understand, and Magneto actually has a lot of fear, because you know, fear is what's leading him to proactively just say, "I'm going to exterminate all my enemies so that I don't have to be afraid, that people like me don't have to be afraid." And you know, and unfortunately, it's, you know, and again, it can be something that is very easy for audiences to be like, "Well, yes, these people are hurting you, so hurt them back."
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that does just lead to more pain and suffering.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It's an eternal struggle.
Yeah. And yeah, it's what makes those two characters so endlessly fascinating, that the story of X-Men is basically the story of this eternal debate between two dear friends. And I'll just also say, I think it's something that a lot of people like. A lot of people love the story of X-Men and the relationship between Charles and Magneto, but I think also the concept I think frightens a lot of people, this idea of, you know, disagreeing vehemently with someone with whom you are incredibly close to and you still have a cherished friendship, but that's who has fundamentally different beliefs than you do. I think that's something that people have grown less comfortable with, and I think a lot of that is driven by fear.
Yeah.
And there are there's no easy answers for the conflict in this story, just like there aren't easy answers in the real world. And I think that's part of what has always been fascinating to me about the X-Men story, is that it is always it's not the darkest and the grittiest of the comic book franchises, but it's, for me, it's always felt the most real world in a way, while also being fantastical, but the ideas that it trades in are so true to life, and they really make you think. And that's why I've always been fascinated by the story in a way that, and this is not to take away from any other comic book stories, but it's always intrigued me more than others because it is a story of ideas as much as it is a story of character. And yeah, and maybe there are probably ideas in those other stories with other comic book characters that appeal to other people, but this is the one that has always been a profound interest to me, and I think that's why I keep coming back to it, and why I'm always I'm so excited that now we've entered back into the age of the X-Men, on the big screen, and we're just getting cooking, and I'm really excited about what lies ahead.
Yeah, no, I am too, and I think that, as you said, that this kind of eternal philosophical question and conflict that lies at the heart of the X-Men story is one of the reasons why it is worth telling these stories again, and that's why I am very excited to see what Marvel Studios will do with the X-Men now that they're fully in-house, because they obviously will have their own interpretations on the characters that will be different from the ones we got in the Fox series. But the core, I have enough respect for Kevin Feige, immense respect for Kevin Feige, who got his start on this movie. I mean, he had worked on a couple things before, but the reason he is where he is today is because he was worked as an associate producer on the first X-Men movie and impressed everybody, and it gave him more opportunities. So he has been there from the beginning. He knows the value of this story, and I have every confidence that will make its way into the new X-Men film. And then you just got to get the casting right, which is going to be hard to top these movies, but and I don't think they have to, but as long as the philosophical tenets of the basic X-Men story are there, I think they can do something really really special with that movie, as these movies were, with all their ups and downs and all of their crazy continuity and everything. As a collective unit, these 13 films that comprise the Fox X-Men saga, there's a reason that we still love it as much as we do and go back to it, and still find meaning in it, new meaning in it, 25 years later. It's because this movie in particular, really captured the essential spark that needed to carry through to the rest of the series. And some of that was the lightning in a bottle casting of, Hugh Jackman and Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart and Famke Janssen and all the rest. But most of it was just, they got the heart of the saga right. And while I personally would say that of this original trilogy, X2 is probably my favorite, I will never overlook the fact that this movie really the fact that it worked is the reason that we have all of this great storytelling, to this day. It really was a triumph against all odds.
Yeah. And it's like gave us, like pretty much the longest lasting, comic book character, ever. Yeah, it's Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. It's there's there's just a reason why the Deadpool and Wolverine movie was such a big moment for everybody. Because and like I was one of those people who was like, oh no, he should have like ended with Logan, but now I'm happy he came back. And I'm happy to see the other people coming back, and you talked about the casting for like the next iteration of X-Men, and then there's a lot of cases here where they're not going to be able to improve on the perfect casting of some of these characters, but it's part of why I'm so happy that these actors have come back for films in the MCU, and that it seems that they're going to culminate in these Avengers films and be given like a really, hopefully a really great swan song and farewell before the next iteration comes up, because then it'll feel like it's all been brought home, and then I'll be able to make peace with seeing new versions of the characters. It's the reason why I was so happy about getting like Toby and Andrew back for Spider-Man No Way Home, because it was a recognition of those years of loving Spider-Man, before the MCU version came along, and so the fact that we're getting that, we have been getting that and are getting that with the X-Men, just is great, because then when we get a new Charles Xavier, when we get a new Magneto, like it'll be okay, because they've honored and respected what came before. Yeah. I still would really like to see them tie in the younger generation version too. I would like to. I know Nicholas Hoult just joked in an interview that like that he didn't think he had any chance of coming back as Beast, and that they went for the and as he said the better version, which is a bit self-depreciating, but we all know how that goes before everything's all said and done. I've got my fingers crossed that we'll at least see a couple of them. I'd like to, in particular, I'd like to see James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, and Jennifer Lawrence especially. But we'll see how that goes. But I'm very happy with the fact that we're getting tribute paid to this original generation of X-Men. It's very fitting and makes me happy as a fan.
Yep, me too.
Yeah. Did you want to go back and talk about anything? Because I feel like we've worked our way to a pretty fitting conclusion for the stream.
Well, there are only two things. One of them is not as fun, but then we can end on the more fun one if you want. I will just point out, like, yes, we have to acknowledge, because we mentioned him briefly, it's unavoidable. This movie was directed by Bryan Singer, who has been facing some pretty ugly accusations about his behavior, both in the industry and just in his personal life, accusations of sexual assault and the like. And this is a case where, if I have to separate the art from the artist, because I'm never going to support anything that Bryan Singer does going forward. Like, I do think this movie is well directed, and X2, and I do think that he, contributed to it. And I feel like, he doesn't get to take my love of these two movies away because he turned out to be not a good guy in real life.
Yeah.
But I know we've had this debate before, like everyone feels differently about this kind of stuff. And for some people, if that's like tarnished the memory of these movies, I understand. I just wanted to acknowledge that we're not unaware of it. We just, chose to focus on the story itself, the many other people who helped make the movie what it is, and just what we find has endured, from this movie. So yeah, it's out there for those who were wondering, and we know about what happened with that guy. But it is separating the art from the artist. I do still think that this is a well-directed film, and I am obviously, still love it very much.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need like any further evidence than the fact that like I'm always one to talk up the director of a film, and I barely even mentioned him in this conversation because he is responsible for the movie that it is, but at the same time, like I'd rather heap praise on the other people involved in the process. Yeah, it's been a complicated thing over the years. I hadn't quite, and I was still kind of struggling with it even when like Days of Future Past came out and he came back to the franchise, and I feel like that's when things like there may have been noise about it beforehand. There probably was, but that was when it started to be a big thing. But then Days of Future Past was a movie that the kind of movie that I'd been looking forward to like forever, just tackling the Days of Future Past story, bringing back the original cast. I ended up going to see the movie. I'm not sure how good I feel about that decision back then, but I did. And, I do love that. That's like, it sucked that he, arguably made the best movies of the franchise. And that's something that I've had to kind of struggle with. I certainly don't think I would support, like anything he did moving forward now. Yeah, I don't really have much more to say about it. It's, it sucks. I hate that that's part of the legacy of these movies. But that's why it's also good that's like that in a couple of years we'll be moving on to a new phase of like X-Men on-screen stories that are going to be divorced from him, which is a good thing, I think. So yeah, it's yeah. No, that's really all I have to say. Like I said, I tried to mention him as little as possible because I don't want to give him any more credit than is necessary. But,
yeah. No, and as you said, like it takes a village to make a movie, and like obviously there are many other people who helped make it this tremendous success that it was, from the cast that we've heaped on praise on to the writer David Hayter, to the other producers, Laura Schuler Donner and Ralph Winter, the cinematographer Newton Thomas Siegel, and the music by Michael Kamen, which was kind of the more positive thing that I wanted to make sure you got the opportunity to gush about.
Yeah, let's. Yeah, that's gonna be nice. Yeah, I'll just like so that I can. Yeah, so that I can praise like the visuals of this movie without talking anymore about that guy. It's yeah, and Newton Thomas Siegel, the cinematography of this film, I think, is gorgeous. What I love most about it is, like, I think X2 was shot on Super 35. This was shot on Panavision. And it's a gorgeous film, and I was watching the 4K version today, and like it's got really fine like film grain. It's looks beautiful in that way. The way everything is shot, and I talked about the style of the film earlier, and how with the production design everything looks so sleek and futuristic, but the cinematography is a big part of that. You mentioned like the way like Ian McKellen is shot in certain scenes with like drenched in shadow, but like it's so evocative. And so like yeah, the cinematography is absolutely gorgeous in this movie. And yeah, everything contributing to like the visual style of the movie, I just think is out of this world. And then also, hopping from the visual style to the oral style, the music by Michael Kamen, I should say the late Michael Kamen, who actually sadly passed away in 2003, or it was either, I think it was maybe early 2004. Who like people will know him from like he scored the original Highlander film. He scored Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Many other classics. And yeah,
The Iron Giant is one of a score of his I
yeah.
really love.
And yeah, what's interesting about the score for this film is it's not what you would expect from a traditional superhero score. Like it doesn't have a big like soaring heroic theme or something. It's again very evocative of like the time in which this movie was made, where it has like a lot of, it was originally even supposed to have more like techno elements. They actually dialed that down a little bit in favor of adding back in some more orchestral tones to it. And so actually on that soundtrack I showed earlier, there's a lot of alternate tracks that have like the more aggressively techno, versions. And it tackles a lot of the stuff also almost more like you would score a drama film than a superhero movie. And I think like maybe now that doesn't seem as revolutionary, but it very much was at the time. And I will say about the actual theme for the X-Men, which is very like I said, it's more understated than you would expect. But what's interesting is that both the theme in this film and then the theme composed by John Ottman in the second film, which is definitely, I would say, is my preferred score of the two. I think the score for X2 is just out of this world and incredible. But I think the themes like for the X-Men in both films do some things with like strings and the theme where it's like it's not quite the animated series theme, but it's definitely hinting towards that, of that kind of, the X-Men anime thing is like and you get a little bit of that in the music for the, I'm trying to think of how it actually goes, where it's like yeah, I wouldn't be able to hum it or anything, but it's like it's evocative about that without being like overt, because I know in the comments for the soundtracks, Michael Kamen talked about very much wanting to like pay homage to that, but still do its own thing, which is something I didn't even realize for years that they were doing that. Which I think is cool. Like it's a recognition that like that X-Men the animated series and that opening theme song cast such a large shadow that they had to address that even in the live action movies. And we've seen that more overt now with the MCU, where obviously they brought it back for X-Men 97, but they've also been incorporating it like every time, like they had it when Professor X shows up in Doctor Strange, and also when mutants get mentioned at the tail end of Miss Marvel.
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So I just think it's really cool that theme like is always there, and that you can't escape it, that it's so closely tied with the X-Men. But as far as the score for this movie, I really liked it a lot. I'm in particular, I like a lot of the smaller flourishes. Like there's this bit when Ian McKellen like as Magneto, like a lot of times when his character comes on screen, it's like a little march where it's like dun 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 dun, dun. You know, it's like I think that's really fun. And yeah, just and the movie starts off with this sort of soft piano piece for the concentration camp, which is very moody, and yeah, I think it's a beautiful score. It's just unfortunately very much more subtle than most superhero scores, so I feel like it gets kind of not necessarily even a bad rap, but people just don't really mention it very often as one of the strengths of this movie. And I think that's a little unfair because I actually think it is a really good score. It's just it's not something that makes its presence terribly known. Which and normally I'd love a score that announces itself. Uh, because those are some of my favorite types of scores. But in the case of this, for what they were trying to achieve, I think it's absolutely the right score for this film because they were trying to play against expectations for a superhero movie, and I think that this does it beautifully. And I think it's a beautifully written score. It's got some great themes. Just unfortunately, it's followed by John Ottman's score for X2, which casts a large shadow because he came back a couple more times throughout the series, and that theme and that musical identity has its own legacy because they actually used that score in the post-credit scene in the Marvels, where we get Beast and and the X-Men universe, and so yeah, if we get around to doing a stream about X2, which I have done one on this channel in the past, but I think since we've done this, we will probably want to go ahead and tackle X2 as well. We will talk a lot about that score because like that's the best of both worlds. I think it's a beautiful match for for the world being depicted, and it does feel like a good extension of this score, but it's also like a more traditional superhero score as well. It's got a very soaring main theme, which is a lot of fun. So yeah, so that's my like. I would just make a plea for everybody to take another listen, when you're watching this movie to the music, because I think it does a lot of really interesting things. And it's beautiful work. And Michael Kamen was one of the greats. And yeah, if you what I especially love is that his theme for Robin Hood Prince of Thieves was so iconic that it actually got used for a number of years, accompanying the studio. Morgan Creek had their like logo at the opening of films, and they just decided to tack his music onto the opening logo because it was so memorable. So yeah, that's something that's like, if we do a stream on that film, I'll be asking Erin to come on and join us because she's a fan of that movie just like I am, and we will be going on and on about the score for that movie.
Nice.
So yeah, rest in peace, Michael Kamen.
Yep, absolutely. Well said.
And yeah, I'm not going to be able to beat that as a closing. As a closing bit for the stream. So anything else you want to mention?
No, I mean, we can, that we could always go back and talk about like little moments that, found like really exciting. Like, you know, the fact like the jet reveal is awesome. But you know, it gets even more to do in X2. But regardless, I feel like we covered enough of like the character, pretty much all the characters, the themes, the central conflict, you know, moral conflict between Xavier and Eric Lencher. So I'm happy with this. You know, as you said, this is kind of like more of a general celebratory anniversary stream, so we're not going like beat by beat by beat through the plot.
I had no structure for this one. This may have been one of our, although we did go through like the characters, and that's a structure. But yeah, it was a little, you know, this one might have been a little wonky, you know, where we went with it. But I'm fine with that. I had a great time talking about it, and yeah, it was just so much fun watching the movie today. Yeah, it's a great one, and now I'm excited. We'll definitely have to pencil in X2 for a discussion.
Yeah, no, that is probably my second favorite of the entire Fox X-Men franchise after only Logan. So I would definitely love to talk about that.
Yeah. Okay. If there's nothing else, just really quick again, talking about what's coming up. We're taking a couple weeks off, so we'll be back in 3 weeks. And our stream on August 3rd, we'll be talking about the film Sinners, which I'm super excited about. Just a really freaking great movie. And and then some of the stuff like on, you know, forecasted after that, we'll be doing our 25th anniversary discussion of The Patriot. We'll be talking about Thunderbolts and Batman Forever, and then, you know, definitely gonna, you know, think about penciling in X2 in there as well, and we'll be figuring out some of that stuff in the discussion that we're going to have after we wrap up here, for sure. But I hope you guys enjoyed tonight. I had a great time talking about the movie, and looking forward to the vacation, though.
Yeah. We'll come back rested and ready.
Yeah. Trying to think if there's anything else I just wanted to say before we sign off. I mean, nothing really. Just again, like, go see Superman if you haven't seen it yet. It's really freaking good. And I will say, what was interesting about watching this movie today, this one retroactive. I don't know if I felt this like back when I originally saw it. I think when it came out, like, there was no concept of like a larger comic book franchise universe or anything. So it's more retroactive that this like kicked off so much to come. But I felt something similar watching Superman yesterday, where. And maybe it's because, I don't know, maybe it's because I was really dissatisfied with the last attempt at a DC universe, but this felt like the beginning of something really special. And so I'm super excited to see what's on the horizon. I'll tell you, I can't wait for Supergirl next year. That's like, I'm really hyped for that. But yeah, so go see it. It's a lot of fun. And and that's it. I don't have anything else. So so I hope you guys all have a wonderful night. And like the video. And if you're watching this and you're not subscribed, please do subscribe. And just have a fun night. You know. Until then, okay. All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.